The crisp autumn air cut through Manhattan's financial district as sharply as Blake Thornton's words cut through his employees. The 50-floor Thompson Tower, named after himself, of course, gleamed in the morning sunlight, its glass facade reflecting a perfect blue sky that belied the storm brewing within. "Unacceptable," Blake's voice thundered across the executive boardroom. His Italian leather shoe tapped an impatient rhythm against the marble floor as he glared at the projection, screen displaying quarterly figures. "I don't pay you people 6 figures to deliver 5-figure results." The assembled executives shifted uncomfortably in their ergonomic chairs, avoiding eye contact with their 38-year-old billionaire boss. Blake ran a hand through his perfectly styled dark hair, the platinum Rolex on his wrist catching the light with each movement. "Jenkins, you have 24 hours to fix this disaster or clear out your desk," he declared, pointing at his trembling CFO. "Anyone else want to join him in the unemployment line?" Silence answered him. With a dismissive wave, Blake ended the meeting, watching as his senior leadership team scrambled out like schoolchildren released from detention. His assistant, Margaret, appeared at his side. "Your 10 a.m. acquisition meeting is set, Mr. Thornton. The Bloom Street bakery owners are waiting in the small conference room." Blake checked his watch. "Tell them I'll be there in 5 minutes. I like to keep people waiting. Builds character." Margaret nodded, having long ago learned not to question her boss's tactics. Blake straightened his custom Tom Ford tie and gathered his thoughts. Bloom Street Bakery occupied prime real estate he needed for his next luxury high-rise. The family-owned business had stubbornly refused his previous offers, but everyone had a price. Blake Thornton always got what he wanted. It was simply a matter of adding zeros to the check. Olivia Bennett wiped flour-covered hands on her apron and took a deep breath. The conference room of Thompson Tower couldn't have been more different from the warm, aromatic bakery she'd managed since her parents passed away 3 years ago. Cold, sterile, and intimidating, just like the man who owned it. "He's coming," her brother Daniel whispered, squeezing her hand under the table. "Remember, we agreed to just hear him out." "I know what we agreed," Olivia replied, tucking a strand of chestnut hair behind her ear. At 32, she'd faced her share of challenges, losing both parents unexpectedly, taking over the family business, raising her teenage brother while he finished high school. But something about Blake Thornton's arrogance made her blood boil in a unique way. The door swung open, and Blake Thornton strode in like he already owned the building, and everything in it, impeccably dressed in a suit that probably cost more than Olivia's monthly revenue. He didn't bother with introductions. "Let's not waste time," he announced, sliding into his chair across from them. "My previous offer was generous. My new offer is even more so." He slid a folder across the table. $5 million, that's 5 times what your little bakery is worth. Olivia opened the folder, her eyes widening at the figure on the document. "The papers are ready to sign," Blake continued, producing a Mont Blanc pen from his breast pocket. "I can have the funds wired to your account before close of business. Today." Daniel looked at Olivia, clearly tempted. $5 million would change their lives. "Mr. Thornton," Olivia began carefully, "while we appreciate your offer, the bakery isn't just a business to us. It's our family's legacy. Our parents built it from nothing." Blake cut her off with a dismissive laugh. "Legacy doesn't pay bills, Ms. Bennett. Sentimentality is a luxury for those who can afford it." He leaned forward. "Let me be clear. I will have that property. The only question is whether you leave with $5 million or nothing when I buy the building from your landlord and triple your rent." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Our landlord wouldn't sell to you," Daniel said, but his voice lacked conviction. Blake's smile was predatory. "He already has. Signed the papers yesterday." He turned his attention back to Olivia. "So, Ms. Bennett, would you like to be a millionaire or would you prefer bankruptcy?" Olivia felt her chest tighten, her breath catching. Everything her parents had worked for, everything she'd fought to preserve after their death. This man saw it as nothing more than square footage. "I understand business, Mr. Thornton," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "But I also understand decency. which is clearly a foreign concept to you. Blake's eyes narrowed. Decency doesn't build empires. And empires don't bake bread? That feeds the soul, Olivia countered. Some things can't be bought. Something flashed in Blake's eyes, surprise perhaps at being challenged. He recovered quickly, reaching into his jacket and pulling out his checkbook. Everyone has a price, Miss Bennett. Name yours. That was when something inside Olivia snapped. Years of grief, struggle, and determination crystallized into a single moment of clarity. She stood slowly, gathering her dignity around her like armor. Not everyone is for sale, Mr. Thornton, she said quietly, and certainly not me. Blake rose to his full height, towering over her. Don't be naive. I could buy and sell people like you 1,000 times over and not dent my fortune. He scribbled on the check, $7 million, final offer, take it, or watch your precious legacy crumble. He held out the check, waving it inches from her face like one might tempt a dog with a treat. The condescension, the absolute certainty that money could solve everything, that she could be purchased like any other asset, pushed Olivia past her breaking point. The sound of her palm connecting with his cheek echoed in the conference room like a thunderclap. The check fluttered to the floor between them. Blake's hand went to his face, his expression a mixture of shock, outrage, and, most surprisingly, fascination. Nobody, Olivia said, her voice shaking with emotion, has ever bought my dignity, Mr. Thornton, and nobody ever will. She grabbed her purse and headed for the door, Daniel scrambling to follow. At the threshold, she turned back to where Blake still stood frozen, the red imprint of her hand blooming on his cheek. You should ice that, she advised calmly. Good day. The conference room door closed behind them with a soft click that seemed to echo throughout the entire tower and throughout Blake Thornton's carefully ordered world. Blake Thornton stared at his reflection in the bathroom mirror, gingerly touching the faint pink outline still visible on his cheek. 24 hours had passed since Olivia Bennett's palm had connected with his face, yet the sensation lingered, both physically and mentally. Sir, the board members are asking if you'd like to reschedule again. Margaret's voice came through the intercom on his desk. He pressed the button. Tell them 15 minutes, he barked, straightening his tie. This was ridiculous. He was Blake Thornton, the man whose net worth had 9 zeros, the man who closed billion-dollar deals before breakfast, the man who made grown men quiver in boardrooms. And here he was, distracted by a baker with flour under her fingernails, a baker who had dared to touch him, to reject him, to look at him with those fiery hazel eyes like he was nothing more than a petulant child. Blake splashed cold water on his face and took a steadying breath. It was just a slap, not even a particularly hard one at that. So why couldn't he stop thinking about it? About her? Olivia, you've been staring at that sourdough for 10 minutes without moving, Daniel observed, startling his sister from her trance. The dough isn't going to knead itself. Sorry, she murmured, plunging her hands into the sticky mixture. I'm just thinking. About how you slapped the richest man in New York? Daniel leaned against the counter. Because that's all I've been thinking about. Do you think we should get a lawyer? What if he sues us? What if... Daniel. Olivia cut him off. If Blake Thornton wanted to retaliate, we'd know by now. She hoped she sounded more confident than she felt. Besides, he had it coming. Oh, no argument there, Daniel grinned. The look on his face was worth at least $1 million of the dollars you turned down. Olivia laughed despite herself, but her smile quickly faded. I might have cost us everything. We're going to lose the bakery. Daniel wrapped an arm around her shoulders, leaving a flower handprint on her blouse. We'll figure something out. We always do. The bell above the door jingled, and Olivia wiped her hands on her apron, preparing to greet the customer. Instead, she froze at the sight of Margaret, Blake Thornton's impeccably dressed assistant, striding toward the counter. Ms. Bennett, she acknowledged with a tight smile. Mr. Thornton requests your presence at his office tomorrow morning at 9. I don't take orders from Blake Thornton, Olivia replied, her heart racing. Margaret's expression didn't change. He anticipated your response. He asked me to inform you that if you don't appear, he'll be forced to visit you here, and he doubts your customers would appreciate the scene. She placed a business card on the counter. The address is on the card, though I imagine you remember where our building is located. As suddenly as she had appeared, Margaret was gone, leaving behind only the faint scent of expensive perfume and the weight of impending doom. Well, Daniel said after a long pause, at least we know he's not ignoring us. Blake's executive floor was quieter than usual the next morning. Word had spread about the mysterious woman who had been escorted to the CEO's office, the same woman who, according to rumors, had left yesterday's meeting in a flurry of dramatic exits and raised voices. Inside his office, Blake paced like a caged lion. He'd rehearsed this conversation countless times since yesterday. He would be calm, collected, and firmly in control. He would make her understand the consequences of her actions. He would. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. "Mr. Thornton, Ms. Bennett is here," Margaret announced. Blake took his position behind his massive desk, the Manhattan skyline spread out behind him like a kingdom. "Send her in." Olivia Bennett entered his office with her chin high, wearing a simple blue dress that probably cost less than his tie. Yet she carried herself with the dignity of royalty. Blake found himself standing, an involuntary gesture of respect he immediately regretted. "Ms. Bennett, thank you for coming." "I didn't have much choice, did I?" She remained standing, declining the chair he gestured toward. "Everyone has choices," Blake replied evenly, "as you so dramatically demonstrated yesterday." A tense silence stretched between them. "Why am I here, Mr. Thornton? To receive threats? Legal action? Or are you simply going to triple my rent and watch me fail?" Blake studied her face, noting the shadows under her eyes. She hadn't slept well either. "Actually," he said, "I have a proposition for you." Olivia's eyes narrowed. "I'm not selling the bakery. I'm not asking you to." Blake circled his desk, reducing the distance between them. "I'm offering you a challenge." "A challenge?" Blake nodded. 1 month. Give me 1 month to convince you that selling is the right decision." Olivia laughed incredulously. "And why would I agree to that?" "Because during that month I'll freeze your rent at its current rate. No increases regardless of the building's new ownership." Olivia's expression faltered. "And after the month?" "If I haven't convinced you, I'll sell the building back to your original landlord at the same price I paid for it. Your situation returns to exactly what it was before I entered the picture." Olivia crossed her arms. "What's the catch?" "The catch, Ms. Bennett, is that you have to spend time with me. Dinners, events, meetings, whatever I deem necessary to demonstrate why taking my offer is the sensible choice. You want me to date you?" The incredulity in her voice was almost offensive. "I want you to understand my world," Blake corrected. "And I want to understand why someone would choose sentiment over security." "This is absurd," Olivia said, but her tone had softened slightly. "Perhaps," Blake conceded. "But what do you have to lose? 1 month of your time in exchange for saving your bakery, either temporarily or permanently depending on your decision." Olivia studied him, her intelligent eyes searching for the trap. "And if I refuse?" Blake shrugged, affecting nonchalance. "Then I proceed as planned. The rent triples next month. You'll be out of business by Christmas." He watched as she processed, his words weighing her limited options. A tiny crease appeared between her eyebrows, a detail he found himself inexplicably fascinated by. "Why are you doing this?" she finally asked. "Why not just crush me and move on?" The question caught Blake off guard. Why indeed? He wasn't entirely sure himself. All he knew was that something about Olivia Bennett had gotten under his skin, something he couldn't simply dismiss or buy off. "Let's call it professional curiosity," he replied smoothly. "I've never encountered someone so resistant to practical solutions. You mean someone who doesn't worship money? I mean someone who'd choose certain failure over comfortable success, he countered. Olivia's gaze was unwavering. And if, at the end of the month, I still refuse to sell? Then you will have earned my respect, Blake said truthfully. And I'll honor our arrangement. Something shifted in her expression, not quite trust, but perhaps the recognition of a genuine offer. She extended her hand. 1 month, Mr. Thornton, and not a day more. Blake took her hand, surprised by the strength in her grip. Her skin was warm against his, rough in places from years of honest work, so different from the manicured hands he typically shook across boardroom tables. The agreement starts now, he said, and please call me Blake. The agreement starts now, she echoed, withdrawing her hand. But I'll call you Blake when you've earned it. As she turned to leave, Blake felt a smile tugging at his lips, a genuine one, not the calculated expression he deployed in negotiations. Ms. Bennett, he called after her, wear something formal tomorrow evening. I'll pick you up at 7. Olivia paused at the door. I have a bakery to run, Mr. Thornton. I don't attend formal events on weeknights. Part of our agreement, he reminded her. Besides, the bakery closes at 6, I checked. For a moment he thought she might argue. Instead, she gave him a measured look. 7 o'clock. Don't be late. After she left, Blake sat at his desk, staring at the contract he'd prepared, the one outlining their arrangement in precise legal terms. He'd intended to make her sign it, to bind her to their agreement with the same formality he applied to all his business dealings. Instead, he placed it in his drawer, choosing to honor something far more powerful than a signature on paper, a promise made eye to eye, with nothing but pride and principle at stake. For the first time in years, Blake Thornton had made a deal, sealed with nothing but his word. You're doing what? Daniel nearly dropped the tray of croissants he was carrying. I'm giving him 1 month to try to convince me to sell, Olivia repeated, arranging pastries in the display case. It buys us time to figure out a long-term solution. And the cost of this time is dating Blake Thornton? Daniel's expression wavered between amusement and concern. It's not dating, Olivia insisted. It's negotiation. An unusual format for negotiation, I'll admit, but... Liv, he's taking you to formal events and picking you up at 7. That's a date. Olivia straightened, brushing flour from her hands. It's strategy, Daniel. He thinks he can charm me into selling. I'm letting him think that while I come up with a plan to save the bakery. And what if his charm works? Daniel wiggled his eyebrows suggestively. Olivia threw a dish towel at him. The man is arrogant, ruthless, and values nothing but money. He's the antithesis of everything Mom and Dad taught us. He's also absurdly good-looking and apparently fascinated by you. He's fascinated by my resistance to his wallet, Olivia corrected, checking her watch. Oh God, it's already 5. I need to close up and get ready. Daniel grinned. Want help choosing something devastatingly attractive to wear to this non-date negotiation? I'm wearing Mom's black dress, Olivia replied, ignoring his teasing. It's the only formal thing I own. Daniel's smile softened. She'd love seeing you in it. At precisely 7 o'clock, a sleek black car pulled up outside the modest apartment above Bloom Street Bakery. Blake Thornton emerged, adjusting his bow tie before approaching the entrance. He'd spent the day in a strange state of anticipation, something he hadn't experienced since, well, he couldn't remember when. He pressed the buzzer labeled Bennett. It's open, came the muffled reply from upstairs. Blake climbed the narrow staircase, noting the worn carpet and peeling paint, details that would normally register as signs of poverty, but now struck him as simply lived in. At the top landing, the door stood ajar. Miss Bennett? He called, pushing it open. Just a minute. Olivia's voice came from somewhere inside. Blake stepped into the small apartment, his gaze sweeping over the cozy living space. Family. Photos lined the walls. Olivia and Daniel through the years, alongside a couple he assumed were their parents. Books spilled from overcrowded shelves. A half-completed jigsaw puzzle occupied the coffee table. Everything about the space spoke, of life, history, connection. Sorry I'm running late. The afternoon rush was... Blake turned toward her voice and felt the words he'd prepared evaporate. Olivia stood in the doorway wearing a simple black dress that hugged her figure in a way her bakery apron never had. Her chestnut hair, usually hastily tied back, fell in soft waves around her shoulders. Without the flour dusting her cheeks, he could see a spray of freckles across her nose. "You look," he began, uncharacteristically at a loss for words. "Presentable?" Olivia suggested, a hint of defensiveness in her tone. "Beautiful," Blake finished honestly. A flicker of surprise crossed her face before she composed herself. "Thank you. You clean up well yourself, Mr. Thornton." "Blake," he reminded her. "We'll see," she countered, grabbing a small clutch from the side table. "So, where are you taking me on this business meeting?" "The Symphony Gala at Lincoln Center," Blake replied, offering his arm. "The New York elite awaits." Olivia hesitated before taking his arm. "And what exactly am I supposed to do at this gala?" "Observe, listen, learn why the decisions I make are necessary in my world." His voice softened slightly. "And perhaps teach me a thing or two about yours." The Lincoln Center sparkled with thousands of lights, the wealthy and powerful of New York mingling in their finest attire. As Blake escorted Olivia from the car, he felt a strange pride walking beside her. She moved with natural grace, head held high despite being surrounded by women draped in jewels worth more than her bakery's annual revenue. "Mr. Thornton," a silver-haired man approached, champagne in hand. "Didn't expect to see you tonight. Thought you'd be closing that downtown development deal." "Senator Williams," Blake nodded. "May I introduce Olivia Bennett?" The senator's eyes assessed Olivia with practiced political precision. "Bennett? Can't say I'm familiar with the family." "Ms. Bennett owns Bloom Street Bakery," Blake explained. "Best sourdough in Manhattan." Olivia's surprise at his knowledge of her bakery's specialty was evident, but she recovered quickly. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Senator." "A baker?" The senator raised an eyebrow at Blake. "How refreshing." "Ms. Bennett is teaching me about small business sustainability," Blake said smoothly. "It's quite enlightening." The senator chuckled, as if Blake had made a clever joke. "Always the businessman looking for angles. Well, enjoy your research." He wandered off toward more influential targets. "Is that how you see me?" Olivia asked quietly. "Research?" Before Blake could answer, they were surrounded by a flutter of socialites, each competing for his attention. Olivia was introduced, and promptly dismissed by most, a curious accessory on the arm of New York's most eligible bachelor, but hardly worth serious conversation. Through it all, Blake noticed how Olivia observed everything with those intelligent eyes, missing nothing. Not the dismissive glances, the whispered speculations, or the calculating assessments of her worth. Blake, darling. A willowy blonde, in a dress that cost more than a luxury car, air-kissed his cheeks. "You've been avoiding my calls." "Vanessa," Blake acknowledged coolly. "I've been busy." "Too busy for the charity board meeting?" Daddy was very disappointed. Her gaze slid to Olivia. "And who's this?" "Olivia Bennett," Blake said. "Olivia, this is Vanessa Harrington. Her father chairs the development committee that's approving my downtown project." Understanding dawned in Olivia's eyes. This was one of the connections that made Blake's world turn, the kind of relationship that determined whether projects succeeded or failed. "Olivia owns a charming little bakery," Blake explained. Vanessa's smile remained fixed, but her eyes turned frosty. "How quaint. I don't eat carbs, of course, but I'm sure it's adequate." Olivia smiled sweetly. "The wonderful thing about bread, Ms. Harrington, is that it brings people together. Rich, poor, hunger is the great equalizer." An uncomfortable silence fell. Blake fought the urge to laugh at Vanessa's expression. "Blake, you simply must circulate," Vanessa recovered, tugging at his arm. "The Ashworths are here, and they're considering investors for that ski resort in Aspen. Perhaps later, Blake said firmly, placing his hand over Olivia's on his arm. We were just heading to see the orchestral setup. As they walked away, Olivia glanced up at him. You just turned down a business opportunity, Mr. Thornton. Isn't that against your religion? This time Blake did laugh, a genuine sound that surprised even him. There are better opportunities. Like convincing a stubborn baker to sell her family legacy. Like understanding why that legacy matters more than financial security, he countered. They paused at the edge of the grand hall, watching as the wealthy and powerful formed alliances and rivalries over champagne and canapes. They're all playing a game, Olivia observed. Collecting points in the form of connections, investments, influence. Blake nodded. It's how the world works. The bread of modern society, if you will. It doesn't look very nourishing, Olivia replied softly. Something in her tone made Blake study her more closely. Are you hungry? The hors d'oeuvres here are… Not for food, Olivia clarified. For substance. Every conversation I've witnessed tonight has been a transaction. Even your introduction of me was strategic. A curiosity to spark conversation. A piece in your game. Her insight struck uncomfortably close to home. Not everything is a transaction, Blake said, surprising himself with the defensive note in his voice. Isn't it? Isn't that exactly what our arrangement is? Before Blake could respond, the orchestra began tuning their instruments, signaling guests to take their seats. As they moved toward the auditorium, a waiter passing with champagne tripped, sending the tray flying directly toward Olivia's black dress. Blake moved instinctively, stepping in front of her. The champagne splashed across his immaculate white shirt and jacket, drawing gasps from nearby guests. The waiter turned pale. Mr. Thornton, I'm so sorry. Please let me… Blake waved him away. Accidents happen, no harm done. Olivia stared at him in astonishment. Your tuxedo is ruined. Blake shrugged, oddly unconcerned about the $12,000 custom Tom Ford now sporting a champagne stain. I have others. Of course you do, Olivia said, but her tone had softened. She reached into her clutch and pulled out a small packet. Here. What's this? Baker's secret, she replied, opening the packet to reveal a stain-removing wipe. Professional hazard when you work with chocolate and berries all day. As she dabbed at his shirt, her face close to his chest, Blake inhaled the faint scent of vanilla and cinnamon that seemed to follow her. It was nothing like the expensive perfumes that usually surrounded him. It was real, warm, alive. There, she said, stepping back to assess her work. Not perfect, but less catastrophic. Thank you, Blake said, the words feeling unfamiliar on his tongue. Not because he never said them, but because he rarely meant them. The evening continued with the symphony performance, a masterful rendition of Beethoven that Blake usually would have appreciated as a demonstration of human excellence. Instead, he found himself watching Olivia more than the orchestra, the way her eyes closed during the crescendos, how her fingers moved slightly in time with the violins. The single, tear that escaped when the cellos played their haunting solo. That was breathtaking, she whispered as the final notes faded, seeming to forget for a moment that she was supposed to be resistant to everything in his world. Yes, Blake agreed, though he wasn't looking at the stage. Breathtaking. Later, as they strolled through the Lincoln Center Plaza toward his waiting car, Blake found himself reluctant for the evening to end. Well, he asked, your assessment of how the other half lives? Olivia considered for a moment. There's beauty in your world, Mr. Thornton. The music, the architecture, the artistry. But there's emptiness, too. She looked up at him. Do you have friends or just connections? Relationships or just transactions? The question penetrated deeper than he expected. I have what I need. Do you? Olivia challenged gently. You have everything money can buy. But what about everything it can't? Blake stopped walking, turning to face her fully. Like what? Like belonging somewhere that values you for who you are, not what you own. Like creating something with your hands that brings joy to others, like connections based on genuine care rather than mutual benefit. Romantic notions, Blake dismissed, but without his usual conviction. Says the man who stepped in front of flying champagne to protect a dress he didn't pay for, Olivia pointed out with a smile. That smile, open, genuine, teasing, did something peculiar to Blake's carefully ordered thoughts. For a moment, he couldn't remember why convincing this woman to sell her bakery had seemed so important. Tomorrow, he said suddenly. Tomorrow? Come to my office at noon. I want to show you something. Olivia's smile faded, wariness returning. More gala? Events? No, Blake promised. Something real. As he watched her ascend the stairs to her apartment after driving her home, Blake realized that for the first time in years, he was actually looking forward to tomorrow. Not for what it would bring financially, but for the simple pleasure of seeing Olivia Bennett's face when he revealed the surprise he was already planning. It was an unfamiliar feeling, this anticipation without calculation. Unsettling, yet somehow exhilarating. Precisely at noon, Olivia found herself once again in the Thompson Tower lobby. Unlike her previous visits, this time the receptionist greeted her by name. Ms. Bennett, Mr. Thornton is expecting you. She handed Olivia a visitor badge. Take the express elevator to the roof. The roof? Olivia asked, puzzled. The receptionist merely smiled. Mr. Thornton's instructions. The elevator climbed 50 floors without stopping, numbers flashing, by as Olivia's stomach fluttered. From the ascent or anticipation, she wasn't entirely sure. When the doors opened, she stepped out into a garden oasis high above Manhattan's concrete jungle. Lush greenery surrounded a central pavilion. Flowers bloomed despite the autumn chill, carefully cultivated in climate-controlled planters. The city spread out in every direction, a breathtaking panorama of urban life. What do you think? Blake's voice came from behind her. When she turned, Olivia was struck by how different he looked in casual attire. Dark jeans and a simple gray sweater that softened his usually sharp edges. It's beautiful, she admitted. Your private retreat from the chaos below? Something like that. Blake gestured toward the pavilion. Come. Lunch is waiting. As they approached, Olivia noticed a table set for two. But what caught her attention was the food. An array of bread, pastries, and baked goods arranged on rustic wooden boards. Is that from Bloom Street Bakery? Yes. Blake pulled out a chair for her. I had Daniel prepare your specialties. He was surprisingly cooperative after I promised this wasn't a corporate espionage mission to steal your recipes. Olivia laughed despite herself. My brother is easily bribed with flattery. And information, Blake added, taking his seat. He was quite curious about our evening at the symphony. I might have mentioned it, Olivia admitted, selecting a piece of her own sourdough. What is all this, Mr. Thornton? Blake, he reminded her. And this is lunch. Simple as that. Olivia raised an eyebrow. Nothing is simple with you. Perhaps that's changing. Blake spread a generous amount of butter on his bread. You asked me last night if I have anything money can't buy. It made me think about what I actually value. And your conclusion? Blake gestured around them. This garden. I designed it myself. Every plant, every path. It's the only place in my empire where profit wasn't the primary motivation. Olivia looked around with new appreciation. It doesn't seem very you, doesn't it? Blake's expression turned thoughtful. My parents were gardeners, not professionally. They could barely afford our apartment in Queens, but they transformed our tiny balcony into something magical, green in a concrete world. This glimpse into his past surprised Olivia. You never talk about your family. There's not much to tell. They died when I was in college, car accident. I built my empire after they were gone. I'm sorry, Olivia said softly. Mine passed 3 years ago. That's when I took over the bakery. A moment of shared understanding passed between them. Is that why you refused to sell? Blake asked. Because it connects you to them. Olivia considered his question. Partly. But it's more than that. The bakery isn't just a business, it's a community. We know our customers' names, their kids, their favorite treats. Mrs. Abernathy comes every Tuesday for her rye bread. The kindergarten class from St. Mary's visits once a month to learn about baking. The homeless shelter on 8th Street gets our day-old bread every evening. Noble, Blake nodded, but financially unsustainable. That's where you're wrong, Olivia countered. We've been sustainable for 30 years because we value more than just profit. We value people. People don't pay bills, Blake argued, but his tone lacked its usual conviction. Actually, they do. Loyalty is currency, Blake. When the economy tanked in 2008, our customers kept coming. When a fire damaged our ovens in 2015, they raised funds to replace them. When my parents died, they brought food to our home for weeks. Olivia leaned forward. What would your investors do if your fortune disappeared tomorrow? The question hung between them, uncomfortable but honest. Point taken, Blake conceded. He stood abruptly. Come with me. I want to show you something else. He led her to a small greenhouse at the edge of the garden. Inside, rows of seedlings grew under carefully calibrated lights. My newest project, Blake explained. Urban farming technology. Sustainable food. Growth in city environments. Olivia examined the plants with interest. This is impressive, but why show me? Because this is the real reason I wanted your property, Blake admitted. The downtown development is just a cover story. I'm planning to convert that entire block into a pilot project. Vertical farming, community gardens, local food production. Your bakery would have been the centerpiece, using ingredients grown right there in the building. Olivia stared at him in disbelief. Why didn't you just tell me that? Would you have believed me, the ruthless developer with a secret passion for sustainable agriculture? Blake shook his head. Besides, business is business. Sentiment doesn't factor into negotiations. Doesn't it? Olivia challenged. You just showed me your garden because of sentiment. You kept this part of yourself hidden, the part that cares about something other than profit margins. Blake turned away, touching a seedling with surprising gentleness. The board would never approve this project if they knew the true motivation. They expect returns, not revolution. So you lie to everyone? Your board, your investors? Me? I accomplish objectives, Blake corrected. The method is irrelevant if the outcome benefits all parties. The method is everything, Olivia insisted. Trust is everything. Their eyes met, and for a moment all pretenses fell away. No billionaire, no baker, just two people standing among growing things trying to find common ground. I don't know how to do this any other way, Blake admitted quietly. Yes, you do, Olivia said, stepping closer. You're doing it right now, being honest, being human. Something shifted in Blake's expression, vulnerability replacing calculation. And if honesty doesn't get results? Then at least you've preserved something more valuable than any deal. What's that? Your integrity, Olivia answered. And maybe something else too. The air between them charged with unspoken possibility. Blake moved closer, his hand brushing hers among the seedlings. Olivia, His phone buzzed insistently. Blake ignored it, but the spell was broken. You should answer that, Olivia said, withdrawing her hand. It could be important. Blake checked the screen, his expression hardening. It's the development committee. They've called an emergency meeting about the downtown project. You should go. Blake hesitated, caught between worlds. Come with me. To a board meeting? Olivia laughed incredulously. Yes. A sudden intensity filled his voice. I want them to hear your perspective, why the bakery matters, why community matters. Help me make them understand. Why would they listen to me? Because I'll make them listen. Blake took her hand. Partners. The word hung between them, laden with meaning beyond business. Partners? Olivia agreed softly. The boardroom fell silent as Blake entered with Olivia beside him. Executives in $1,000 suits exchanged puzzled glances. Mr. Thornton, Vernon Porter, the eldest board member, broke the silence. We weren't expecting company. Ms. Bennett isn't company, Blake replied coolly. She's a consultant on the downtown project, and she has my complete confidence. Olivia fought to keep her expression neutral as she took a seat beside Blake at the head of the table. Now, I understand there are concerns about the project timeline? Porter cleared his throat. Yes, construction was scheduled to begin next month, but we've received information that several properties are still holding out, including, ironically, Ms. Bennett's bakery. He gave Olivia a pointed look. Actually, Blake said, I'm proposing a complete reconfiguration of the downtown development. Murmurs rippled through the room. Blake activated the presentation screen and pulled up a new set of renderings. His urban farming concept, reimagined to incorporate the existing neighborhood businesses, including Bloom Street Bakery. Rather than demolishing and rebuilding, we'll renovate and enhance. The bakery becomes our flagship tenant using produce grown in our vertical farming systems. We convert the upper floors to residential, but maintain the street-level character that makes the neighborhood desirable in the first place. This is unorthodox, Porter said carefully. It's innovative, Blake countered. And more importantly, it's sustainable, both environmentally and financially. Our projections show a slower initial return, but greater long-term profitability and significantly better community relations. Community relations don't pay dividends, another board member objected. Don't they? Olivia spoke up, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Thornton Industries has spent millions on PR campaigns trying to improve your public image. Meanwhile, local businesses like mine build community goodwill every day without spending a dime on marketing. Blake nodded. Ms. Bennett's point is excellent. By partnering with established community businesses rather than displacing them, we gain authentic local support no PR firm could buy. For the next hour, Blake and Olivia presented a united vision, his business acumen paired with her community insight, his resources with her practical experience. By the end, even Porter's skepticism had softened. I must say, Mr. Thornton, this approach has a merit, Porter conceded, though it's quite a departure from your usual methods. Sometimes we need new methods to achieve better results, Blake replied, his eyes meeting Olivia's briefly. The vote? One by one, the board members signaled their approval, some more reluctantly than others. As the meeting adjourned, Blake turned to Olivia, his expression a mixture of triumph and wonder. We did it, he said softly. You did it, Olivia corrected. You showed them another way. I couldn't have done it without you. As they left the boardroom, walking side by side through the gleaming corridors of Thompson Tower, Blake seemed different, his stride less domineering, his expression more open. Does this mean our arrangement is concluded? Olivia asked as they reached the elevator. You're not trying to convince me to sell anymore. Not exactly, Blake admitted, but I think we need a new arrangement. Oh? The elevator doors closed, leaving them alone in the small space. Dinner tonight? Blake asked, suddenly looking almost nervous. Not as a billionaire and a baker, just as Blake and Olivia. Olivia studied him, this complex man who had been her adversary, then her reluctant ally, and now perhaps something else entirely. I close at 6, she said finally, her lips curving into a smile. Don't be late. 6 months later, Bloom Street Bakery hummed with activity as the morning rush filled the newly expanded space. Sleek hydroponic gardens lined the walls, growing. Herbs and microgreens used in Olivia's latest creations. The renovation had preserved the bakery's charm while incorporating elements of Blake's sustainable vision. Daniel emerged from the back, carrying a tray of cinnamon rolls. The Thompson Tower order is ready. I'll take it, Blake offered, appearing from the small office he now shared with Olivia. He wore jeans and a Bloom Street Bakery apron, his suit jackets increasingly relegated to board meetings only. The mighty Blake Thornton delivery boy, Daniel teased. What would your shareholders say? They'd say our partnership with Bloom Street has increased quarterly profits by 12%. Blake replied with a grin, loading the pastries into a delivery box. Sustainable business is good business. Is that why you're here every morning at 5 to help with the baking? Olivia asked, sliding her arms around his waist from behind. Blake turned to face her, flour dusting his cheek. You know why I'm here? Their kiss was brief but tender, the easy affection of two people who had found their way to each other against all odds. Gross, Daniel commented cheerfully, heading back to the kitchen. Get a room, preferably one I don't have to walk through, to get to the ovens. Blake laughed, a sound that had become wonderfully common. I should get these to the tower. The executive meeting starts in 30 minutes. Will you be back for lunch? Olivia asked. Try and stop me, Blake replied, stealing another kiss before gathering the delivery box. Oh, and don't forget, dinner at 7. I'm cooking. You? Cooking? Olivia raised a skeptical eyebrow. Should I be concerned? I've been practicing, Blake defended. Besides, I have something important to ask you. The weight of a small, velvet box in his pocket reminded him of just how important that question was. Not a business proposition or negotiation, but the most meaningful arrangement he'd ever propose. As Blake stepped into the sunshine of Bloom Street, nodding to the familiar faces of neighborhood regulars, he reflected on how much had changed in 6 months. His empire was evolving, still profitable, but now with purpose beyond wealth accumulation. His sustainable urban agriculture initiative had launched to international acclaim. The downtown development was becoming a model for community-integrated commercial spaces, but the most profound change was within himself. The cold calculations that had driven him for so long had given way to warmer considerations, not just what could be bought, but what should be valued. Inside his pocket, his fingers brushed against the velvet box once more. Tonight, he would ask Olivia to continue their partnership in the most permanent way possible. Not because it made financial sense, though their combined ventures were thriving, but because in her kitchen, covered in flour and arguing about the proper proofing time for sourdough, he had found something his money could never buy: a home for his heart. Blake Thornton, the man who once believed everything had a price, had finally discovered the priceless, and he wasn't letting it go. The end.
The golden sunlight of a late Charleston afternoon filtered through the thick oak trees lining the driveway, casting long, jagged shadows on the ground. Ada Green gripped the steering wheel tightly as her car approached the looming gates of Beaumont Manor. The estate was more massive than she had imagined, a sprawling mansion with towering columns and ivy climbing the brick facade. It had an air of grandeur, but also of something forlorn, as if the house held secrets too heavy for its walls. As the gates creaked open, Ada felt a twinge of unease. She reminded herself of why she was here, to care for May Beaumont, a woman who had been in a vegetative state for months. The job came highly recommended by her agency, but something about the rushed nature of the offer and the lucrative compensation had made Ada wary. Yet this was a chance she couldn't pass up. With her experience as a nurse and her need for a fresh start, it seemed like the perfect opportunity. Pulling into the circular driveway, Ada stepped out of her car and smoothed her navy blue uniform. A brisk breeze stirred the scent of magnolias and the faint aroma of salt water drifting from the nearby harbor. Before she could knock, the heavy front door opened and a tall man in his late 30s appeared, Gavin Beaumont. "Miss Green, I presume?" His voice was smooth but clipped, his eyes scanning her with a mix of politeness and something she couldn't quite place. An assessment, perhaps. "Yes, Mr. Beaumont," she replied, extending her hand. He hesitated briefly before shaking it, his grip firm but fleeting. "Come in," Gavin said, stepping aside. The foyer was just as grand as the exterior, with a chandelier that sparkled above a polished marble floor. Portraits of stern-faced ancestors lined the walls, their gazes following her as she stepped further inside. "We'll discuss your duties in my study." Ada followed him down a dimly lit hallway. The silence was heavy, broken only by the muffled ticking of a grandfather clock. As they entered the study, Gavin gestured for her to sit in a high-backed chair opposite his desk. "My wife May has been in a delicate condition since her accident," Gavin began, his tone measured. "You'll be responsible for her daily care, feeding, monitoring her vitals, administering her medication. Joyce, our housekeeper, will assist you as needed." The way he spoke about May was clinical, detached, as if discussing a patient rather than his wife. Ada nodded, taking mental notes. "I'll need access to her medical history and a full inventory of her medications." "Of course," he said, though his tone suggested mild annoyance at her thoroughness. "Joyce can provide that. She's been with us for years and knows the routine well." As Gavin outlined the schedule, Ada noticed the absence of warmth in his demeanor. It was hard to reconcile this composed man with the love and devotion one might expect from a husband whose wife was incapacitated. She decided not to dwell on it, though the thought lingered. After their discussion, Gavin led her upstairs to May's room. The air grew cooler as they ascended, and Ada couldn't shake the feeling that the house itself was holding its breath. When they reached the bedroom, Gavin pushed the door open and gestured for her to enter. May lay motionless in a large four-poster bed, her pale face framed by dark, wavy hair that fanned across the pillows. Monitors beeped softly, and an IV line snaked from her arm to a stand beside the bed. The room was meticulously clean, but lacked any personal touches. No photographs, no flowers, nothing to indicate the life May had led before this state. "I'll leave you to settle in," Gavin said, his voice softer now. He lingered for a moment, then turned and left without another word. Ada stood by May's bedside, studying her new patient. May's face, though serene, bore faint lines of tension, as if she were caught in a struggle invisible to everyone else. Gently, Ada reached for her hand, her fingers brushing against May's skin, cool but alive. "Hello, May," Ada murmured. "I'm here to take care of you." May didn't stir, but Ada couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. It wasn't May. It was something else. The sensation prickled at the back of her neck as she glanced around the room. Shaking off the unease, Ada focused on familiarizing herself with the equipment and medications. As she worked, the faint creak of floorboards in the hallway caught her attention. She paused, listening, but the sound was gone as quickly as it came. With a deep breath, Ada resolved to focus on her job, though the unsettled feeling lingered like a shadow in the corners of the room. Ada spent the next hour unpacking her bag and organizing her workspace in May's room. She methodically checked the monitors, IV setup, and the medication tray on the nearby table. Everything seemed in order, but something about the meticulously arranged pills and syringes felt oddly impersonal. Too clinical, too detached, as though the caregiving had become mechanical rather than compassionate. She moved to the bedside, her eyes sweeping over May's motionless form. Ada couldn't help but wonder what kind of life this woman had lived before the accident. Who was May Beaumont? What dreams had she nurtured, and what had led her to this frozen state between life and death? Ada had cared for many patients in difficult circumstances, but something about May's situation unsettled her in ways she couldn't quite explain. Interrupting her thoughts, a light knock sounded at the door. Before Ada could answer, the door creaked open, and a woman in her late 50s entered. She had sharp, watchful eyes and carried herself with a no-nonsense demeanor. "You must be Miss Green," the woman said, her southern accent as crisp as a winter morning. "I'm Joyce Monroe, the housekeeper. Mr. Beaumont said you'd need the rundown of everything." "That's right," Ada replied, offering a polite smile. "I was just getting familiar with May's setup. I'd appreciate any details you can share about her routine." Joyce nodded curtly and stepped closer. "May's care is simple enough. She gets her meds every 6 hours, sponge baths in the morning, and her vitals are checked twice a day. She doesn't move, doesn't make a sound, so things are predictable." There was an edge to her voice, as though she resented having to explain. Ada studied Joyce carefully. The woman seemed competent, but there was a guardedness about her, a subtle tension that spoke of things unsaid. "Predictable is good," Ada said lightly, though her instincts told her there was more to this household than what met the eye. Joyce's gaze lingered on Ada for a moment before she added, "Dinner's at 7. Mr. Beaumont prefers everyone to eat together. It's just him, me, and now you. William doesn't come out much these days." "William?" Ada asked, seizing the opportunity to learn more. "May's father," Joyce said, her tone dropping slightly, as if the mere mention of his name carried weight. "He's been withdrawn since the accident. Stays in the East Wing most of the time. You'll meet him eventually, I suppose." Ada nodded, filing the information away. "Thank you for letting me know." Joyce gave a tight smile, then turned to leave. Just as she reached the door, she paused. "Oh, and one more thing. May's room? It's off limits to everyone except you and me, Mr. Beaumont insists. Says it's better that way." The words hung in the air as Joyce left, closing the door softly behind her. Ada frowned. Why would May's room need to be so restricted? And why had Joyce seemed so insistent, almost warning her, about the rule? The questions churned in Ada's mind as she returned to the bedside, her gaze settling once more on May. As she adjusted the blanket over May, she noticed something odd, a faint mark on May's wrist partially hidden beneath the IV tape. Ada leaned closer, her brow furrowing. It wasn't the kind of mark left by a needle or medical tape. It looked more like a bruise, subtle but unmistakable. Her stomach tightened. Could it be from the accident, or was it something more recent? Before she could examine it further, the door opened again, this time with a slow, deliberate creak. Ada straightened, expecting Joyce or perhaps Gavin, but instead a man stepped inside. He was older, with grey streaks in his hair and a face lined with grief. His eyes were sharp, though softened by years of sadness. "You must be Ada," the man said, his voice low and steady. "I'm William Whitmore." Ada extended her hand, noticing how firmly he shook it, despite his seemingly fragile appearance. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Whitmore. I've heard you're May's father." He nodded, his eyes drifting toward the bed. "She was always full of life, my May. It's hard to see her like this." His voice cracked slightly, and he paused to collect himself. "But I hope you'll take good care of her. She deserves that much." "I'll do everything I can," Ada assured him, her voice firm with resolve. William lingered for a moment, his gaze locked on May before turning back to Ada. "There are things you'll come to notice in this house, Miss Green. Things that don't quite add up. If you do, I suggest you trust your instincts." He left without another word, leaving Ada standing there, her pulse quickened. The unease she had felt earlier now seemed to grow roots, settling deep in her chest. Something was very wrong in the Beaumont household, and she was determined to find out what. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of Beaumont Manor's dining room, illuminating the polished mahogany table where Ada sat. She had arrived early for breakfast, hoping to ease herself into the rhythms of the household. Across from her, Gavin was already seated, reading the morning paper. The clink of his silver spoon against his coffee cup was the only sound in the cavernous room. "Did you sleep well, Miss Green?" he asked without looking up, his voice as measured as ever. "Well enough, thank you," Ada replied politely, though she had barely slept. The weight of her first day, combined with the cryptic warnings from both Joyce and William, had left her restless. She took a sip of the tea Joyce had prepared and glanced around the room. It was impeccably maintained, like the rest of the house, but it felt cold, more museum than home. Before the conversation could continue, Joyce entered, carrying a tray of freshly baked biscuits. She placed it on the table and began setting out plates with practiced efficiency. "Mr. Beaumont, I've prepared the ledgers for you to review after breakfast," she said, her tone deferential but brisk. Gavin gave a slight nod. "Very good. And, Miss Green, you'll find everything you need for May's care in her room. Joyce will assist you with the routine until you're comfortable." Ada nodded, carefully concealing her curiosity. "Thank you. I'd like to review her medical history and the medications this morning." Gavin's brow furrowed ever so slightly, but he masked it with a polite smile. "Of course. Joyce can provide you with the necessary details." Joyce glanced at Ada, her expression unreadable. "I'll bring the files up after breakfast," she said, before excusing herself. As Ada finished her meal, she noticed Gavin occasionally watching her from behind his newspaper. His gaze wasn't overtly hostile, but there was something unsettling about it, as if he were gauging her intentions. She forced herself to remain calm, reminding herself that she was here to do a job. After breakfast, Ada headed upstairs to May's room. The atmosphere on the upper floor was markedly different from the rest of the house, quieter, heavier, as though the walls themselves bore the weight of the secrets they contained. She opened the door to find Joyce already there, organizing the medication tray. "Here's what you asked for," Joyce said, handing Ada a folder thick with papers. "These are the medical reports and prescription details. Everything's in order." Ada thanked her and began flipping through the documents. The reports were detailed, outlining May's condition and treatment since the accident. But as she read further, Ada noticed inconsistencies, minor discrepancies in the dosage logs, notes that didn't match the prescribed regimens. Her instincts as a nurse kicked in, and she frowned. "These notes seem incomplete," Ada said, trying to keep her tone neutral. "Were there any changes to May's treatment plan recently?" Joyce hesitated for a moment, then shook her head. Not that I know of. Everything's been handled exactly as the doctors instructed. Ada wasn't convinced, but she decided to let it go for now. Instead, she focused on familiarizing herself with May's daily care. As she worked, she noticed something unusual. A faint scent of lavender lingering around the medication tray, out of place amidst the sterile smell of the room. It was subtle but enough to pique her curiosity. Joyce watched her closely, her expression guarded. "If you have questions, just let me know," she said, before leaving the room. Once alone, Ada exhaled and sat by May's bedside. She looked at her patient, studying the serene yet distant expression on her face. "What happened to you, May?" she whispered softly. "What are they hiding?" May, as always, gave no response, but the faint mark Ada had noticed on her wrist the night before was still there. It wasn't fading like an old bruise should. If anything, it seemed darker. Ada picked up her notepad and began documenting everything she had observed. The inconsistencies in the medical reports, the odd scent of lavender, the bruise, all details she couldn't afford to ignore. Something wasn't right, and Ada was determined to uncover the truth. The rest of the morning passed in a quiet yet charged atmosphere. Ada immersed herself in May's care routine, cleaning the IV site, checking the monitors, and ensuring that her patient was as comfortable as possible. Despite the outward serenity of the task, her mind raced with questions. The oddities she had noticed were like pieces of a puzzle, each hinting at something larger, yet refusing to come together. Her focus was interrupted by a light knock at the door. When she opened it, William stood there, holding a cup of coffee and looking as though he hadn't slept much. His shirt was slightly wrinkled, and his expression carried the weight of sleepless worry. "Miss Green," he greeted, his voice low. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." "Not at all," Ada replied, stepping aside to let him in. "Is everything all right?" William nodded but didn't look convinced. He walked over to May's bedside, placing the coffee on the small table nearby. He studied his daughter's face in silence for a moment before speaking. "She was always so strong, you know, stubborn as a mule but full of life. To see her like this." His voice broke slightly, and he turned away, clearing his throat. Ada hesitated but then decided to share some of her observations. "Mr. Whitmore, I noticed a few inconsistencies in May's medical records. Nothing conclusive, but enough to raise questions. Do you know if there were any changes to her care recently?" William's gaze sharpened, and he turned to face her. "Changes? Not that I've been told. Gavin handles most of the details now. Ever since the accident." He trailed off, his face darkening. "I'm not saying he's doing anything wrong, but he's distant. He wasn't always like this." The unspoken words hung in the air. Ada could sense William's reluctance to accuse Gavin outright, but his doubt was clear. "If there's anything you think I should know, please tell me," she urged gently. "I want to do everything I can for May, but I need the full picture." William sighed deeply, running a hand through his greying hair. "You're a good woman, Miss Green. I can see that. There are things about this house, about what happened to May, that don't sit right with me. I've kept my suspicions to myself because, well, I don't have proof. But if you notice anything at all, trust your instincts." Before Ada could respond, a sharp voice cut through the air. "Father!" Ada and William both turned to see Gavin standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable, but his tone laced with irritation. "Is there a reason you're bothering Miss Green during her work hours?" William's jaw tightened, but he maintained his composure. "I was simply checking on May. I think I'm entitled to that." "Of course you are," Gavin said smoothly, stepping further into the room. "But let's not distract Miss Green from her duties, shall we?" Ada felt the tension crackling between the two men, but forced herself to stay calm. Mr. Whitmore wasn't a distraction. I appreciate his insight about May. Gavin gave her a tight smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. Insight is one thing, but we wouldn't want to overwhelm you with irrelevant details. May's care is your priority, after all. His words were polite, but the undercurrent of control was unmistakable. Ada nodded, though she couldn't shake the feeling that Gavin's presence was as much about asserting dominance as it was about concern for his wife. "Very well," William said after a long pause. He patted May's hand gently before turning to leave. As he passed Gavin, he shot him a glance that was both resigned and defiant. After William was gone, Gavin lingered, watching Ada as she resumed her tasks. "My father can be emotional," he said finally. "I hope he hasn't burdened you." "Not at all," Ada replied, her tone carefully neutral. Gavin studied her for another moment before nodding. "Good. If you need anything, don't hesitate to ask Joyce or me." He left without another word, closing the door softly behind him. Ada let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. The dynamics in this household were more complicated and more charged than she had anticipated. As she turned back to May, she caught a flicker of movement in the corner of her eye. Startled, she glanced toward the window, but there was nothing there. Just the rustling of the curtains in the breeze. Shaking her head, Ada sat down by May's bedside once more. "You're the key to all of this, aren't you?" she murmured, her voice barely audible. "Whatever they're hiding, you know the truth. And I'm going to find it." May's expression remained as serene as ever, but for the briefest moment, Ada thought she saw the faintest flutter of May's eyelids. Whether it was her imagination or something more, it strengthened her resolve. Whatever lay beneath the surface of Beaumont Manor, Ada was determined to uncover it. The morning air in May's room was still and heavy as Ada began her usual routine. She carefully adjusted the IV drip and checked May's vitals, her movements precise yet gentle. The bruise on May's wrist had darkened further, and Ada made a mental note to bring it up if Gavin or Joyce questioned her later. Something about that mark gnawed at her instincts, though she couldn't yet articulate why. As she worked, Ada couldn't shake the feeling that May's presence wasn't as dormant as it seemed. There was a subtle shift in the room, a quiet energy that made her glance at her patient more often than usual. Was it possible May could hear her, even if she couldn't respond? The thought sent a chill down Ada's spine, but also strengthened her determination. After completing the physical care tasks, Ada decided to test a theory. She pulled a small flashlight from her pocket and gently opened May's eyelids one at a time, shining the light to observe any reaction. The pupils constricted faintly, a normal response. But what caught Ada off guard was the subtle twitch at the corner of May's mouth. It was brief, almost imperceptible, but it was there. "May?" Ada whispered softly, crouching closer. "If you can hear me, try to move your fingers." For a long moment, nothing happened. Ada held her breath, her pulse quickening. Then, with the faintest of movements, May's fingers twitched against the bedsheet. Ada's heart leapt, a mix of relief and shock coursing through her. This wasn't involuntary, this was communication. She crouched down to May's level, her voice steady but filled with urgency. "May, I'm here to help you. I need to know if you're aware of what's happening around you. If you understand, twitch your fingers again." Another pause, then a second twitch. Ada almost couldn't believe it. Months of supposed vegetative state, and here May was, locked inside her own body, but aware. Ada grabbed her notepad and quickly scribbled down the details of what she had observed, her mind racing. If May was conscious, this changed everything. Her treatment plan, her prognosis, the way the household interacted with her, none of it could remain the same. But even as hope surged within Ada, so did a heavy sense of dread. If Gavin and Joyce had been keeping May in this state deliberately, they wouldn't welcome this discovery. The creak of floorboards outside the room made Ada freeze. She turned her head sharply toward the door, her heart pounding. The sound stopped, and after a tense moment she heard footsteps retreating down the hall. Someone had been there, listening. Ada quickly tucked her notepad into her bag and composed herself. Joyce appeared a few minutes later, carrying fresh linens. "Good morning, Miss Green," she said with a small, guarded smile. Her tone was polite, but Ada couldn't help but notice the way Joyce's eyes lingered on her, sharp and calculating. "Morning," Ada replied, keeping her expression neutral. She moved away from the bed to allow Joyce room to change the sheets. As Joyce worked, Ada felt the weight of silence between them. The woman moved with practiced efficiency, but there was an undercurrent of tension in her movements. Ada decided to break the silence, testing the waters. "May's wrist looks worse today. Have you noticed anything like that before?" Joyce didn't look up from her task. "Bruises aren't uncommon for someone in her condition. It's probably from the fourth or repositioning." "Maybe," Ada said lightly, though she didn't believe it. She decided not to press further, knowing it would only raise suspicion. When Joyce finished, she folded the soiled linens neatly and gave Ada a thin smile. "If you need anything, you know where to find me." Ada nodded, watching as Joyce left the room. Once alone again, she exhaled deeply. The discovery of May's awareness had changed everything, but it also added a new layer of danger. Whoever had been outside the door earlier had likely overheard her, and she couldn't be sure what they would do with that information. Ada returned to May's side, her voice low but resolute. "Don't worry, May. We'll figure this out." I promise. The rest of the morning passed in a blur as Ada tried to focus on May's care while grappling with the weight of her discovery. Each sound from the hallway made her glance toward the door, her senses on high alert. Whoever had been outside earlier could have heard just enough to become a threat, not only to her, but also to May. By midday, Ada decided she needed a plan. May's subtle communication was a breakthrough, but it was also fragile. Without more evidence, there was no guarantee that anyone would believe her, especially not in a house where Gavin held all the power. She sat down at the small desk in the corner of May's room and began outlining her observations, carefully documenting every twitch, every reaction. If she were to confront Gavin, or anyone else, she would need to be meticulous. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. This time, it was William. His expression was somber, but there was a flicker of curiosity in his eyes as he stepped into the room. "I hope I'm not interrupting," he said, his voice low. "Not at all," Ada replied, motioning for him to enter. She had grown to appreciate his calm demeanor, a stark contrast to Gavin's calculating presence. "I was just going over some notes." William's gaze shifted to May, and his shoulders sagged slightly. He pulled up a chair beside the bed, reaching for his daughter's hand. "Any changes?" he asked, his tone laced with both hope and hesitation. Ada hesitated. Trusting William felt instinctively right, but her discovery about May's awareness was too delicate to share outright. "She's stable," Ada said carefully, "but I've noticed some things that could indicate improvement. It's too early to say for sure." William looked at her sharply, his eyes narrowing slightly. "You're a terrible liar, Miss Green." The statement caught Ada off guard, and she felt a flush rise to her cheeks. "I'm just trying to be thorough," she said, deflecting. William leaned closer, lowering his voice. "If you've seen something, anything, you need to tell me. I don't trust what Gavin and Joyce are doing in this house. I can't prove it, but I've had my doubts for a long time." The intensity in his voice broke through Ada's guardedness. She glanced toward the door, ensuring it was closed, then turned back to William. "I think May might be aware," she said, her words barely above a whisper. "I've seen her respond, small movements, but deliberate." William's eyes widened, and his hand tightened around May's. "You're sure?" "I wouldn't say it if I wasn't," Ada replied firmly, "but I don't think it's safe for this to get out, not yet. If they've been keeping her in this state on purpose." Her voice trailed off, the weight of her implications settling between them. William's jaw clenched, and he nodded slowly. "You're right. We need to be careful." He paused, his expression darkening. Joyce has always been loyal to Gavin, but lately she's been different, almost nervous. If May's waking up, it could be enough to unravel whatever they've been hiding. Ada's mind raced as she processed his words. "We need more evidence, something concrete that proves what they've been doing." William's brow furrowed in thought. "Gavin keeps most of his personal documents in the study. It's locked, but I know where he keeps the key. If there's anything incriminating, it'll be there." Ada nodded, a plan beginning to take shape. "I'll keep working with May to document her progress. If we can show she's recovering, it'll give us leverage." "You're taking a risk by staying here," William said, his voice heavy with concern, "but I'll do whatever I can to help you." Their conversation was cut short by the sound of footsteps approaching the door. Both Ada and William stiffened as the knob turned and Gavin stepped inside. His eyes flicked between them, his expression unreadable. "Am I interrupting something?" "Just visiting May," William said smoothly, though Ada noticed the slight tension in his voice. "Miss Green was updating me on her care." Gavin's gaze lingered on Ada, a flicker of suspicion crossing his face before he spoke. "I'm sure Miss Green has plenty to keep her occupied. Father, perhaps you'd like to join me in the study. I have some financial matters I'd like to discuss." William hesitated, but eventually stood, patting May's hand one last time. "Of course," he said, his voice neutral. He gave Ada a brief, reassuring glance before following Gavin out of the room. As the door closed behind them, Ada let out a shaky breath. She returned to May's bedside, her mind churning with possibilities. The alliance she had formed with William felt like a step forward, but Gavin's growing suspicion cast a shadow over their progress. Kneeling beside May, Ada spoke softly. "I need you to keep fighting, May. Whatever they've done, we're going to find the truth." I promise May remained still, but the faintest twitch of her fingers gave Ada the strength to carry on. Ada sat alone in the dimly lit room, the weight of the conversation with William still pressing heavily on her. The plan they had discussed was risky, but the stakes were too high to ignore. May's faint signs of consciousness had opened a door to the truth, but it was only a crack. To push it open fully, Ada needed more than just her observations. She needed solid evidence. Her thoughts were interrupted by the soft sound of the wind pressing against the window, a rhythmic creaking that only deepened the stillness of the room. She turned to May, her expression a mixture of determination and concern. "We're getting closer," she murmured, brushing a stray lock of hair from May's face. "I just need you to hang in there." The sound of a soft knock at the door startled her. Ada quickly composed herself as Joyce entered, carrying a tray with a glass of water and a small dish of pills. "Medication time," Joyce said with a practiced smile, her tone casual but her eyes sharp. Ada watched closely as Joyce approached the bedside. Every movement the housekeeper made seemed deliberate, calculated. Joyce placed the tray on the table and turned to adjust May's blankets. "She looks peaceful today," Joyce commented, her voice carrying an almost detached air. "She does," Ada replied, keeping her tone neutral. As Joyce worked, Ada's gaze flickered to the pills on the tray. One of the capsules caught her attention, a slightly different color than the others. Her training as a nurse made her immediately suspicious. Could it be a mistake? Or was it something more sinister? "Have there been any changes to her medication recently?" Ada asked, her voice steady. Joyce paused for just a fraction of a second before responding. "Not that I'm aware of. Everything's been as prescribed by doctor." Ada nodded but said nothing further, carefully filing away the interaction in her mind. When Joyce left the room, Ada quickly examined the pills on the tray. The capsule, she had noticed, was indeed different, a faint lavender hue that seemed out of place among the standard medications. She jotted down a quick note in her journal and decided to test it later, ensuring she had more information before raising any alarms. As the day wore on, Ada's unease deepened. Every interaction with Joyce and Gavin seemed to carry an underlying tension, as though they were waiting for her to make a misstep. But if they suspected her growing knowledge, they hadn't acted on it. Yet. By mid-afternoon, Ada decided to investigate further. The inconsistencies in May's medical history still gnawed at her, and she was determined to find answers. She waited until the house had grown quieter, the distant echo of footsteps fading into the background. With a deep breath, she slipped out of May's room and made her way down the hallway toward the library, where she remembered seeing a locked cabinet on her first day. The library was dark, its heavy curtains drawn tightly shut. Ada hesitated for a moment, listening for any signs of movement before stepping inside. The faint scent of old paper and leather-bound books filled the air as she approached the cabinet. She crouched down, inspecting the lock. It was simple, and Ada's hands moved swiftly to pick it using a small hairpin she had brought with her for this purpose. The lock clicked open, and Ada eased the cabinet door ajar. Inside, a collection of neatly labeled files and notebooks lined the shelves. Her eyes scanned the labels quickly. Financials, medical records, estate planning. Her heart raced as she reached for the folder marked May and pulled it free. Flipping through the documents, Ada's breath caught. The pages contained more inconsistencies, treatment orders that didn't match the notes she had reviewed earlier, and signatures that appeared to be forged. Her hands trembled slightly as she read, her worst fears slowly taking shape. Whatever had happened to May, it wasn't an accident. The sound of footsteps approaching the library froze her in place. Panic surged through her veins as she quickly replaced the folder, closed the cabinet, and locked it. She turned to the nearest bookshelf, grabbing a random book and pretending to read just as the door creaked open. It was Gavin. His eyes narrowed as they landed on her. "Miss Green?" he said smoothly, though his voice carried an edge. "What are you doing in here?" Thinking quickly, Ada held up the book. "I wanted to find something to read during my breaks. May's room can feel heavy at times." Gavin's lips curved into a thin smile. "Of course, but next time let Joyce or me know. We don't want you getting lost in this old house." Ada nodded, her pulse pounding in her ears. Gavin lingered for a moment longer before stepping back and closing the door behind him. As soon as she was alone, Ada exhaled shakily, clutching the book tightly in her hands. She had taken a risk and nearly been caught. But the folder she had found confirmed one thing. There was a carefully constructed lie surrounding May's condition, and she was beginning to unravel it. Ada returned to May's room, her mind racing with the revelations from the cabinet. The forged signatures, the altered treatment plans, each piece of evidence pointed to deliberate manipulation of May's condition. Sitting by the bedside, Ada stared at May's serene, motionless face, a sharp contrast to the storm of questions swirling in her mind. She leaned in close, her voice low. "May, I don't know how yet, but I'm going to find a way to fix this. They won't keep you like this forever." As if in response, May's fingers twitched ever so slightly. It was a small movement, but to Ada it felt like an acknowledgement. Taking this as a sign, she decided to accelerate her efforts. She would need to test the pills, document more signs of May's awareness, and, most importantly, find out what Gavin and Joyce were hiding. That evening, during dinner, the tension at the table was palpable. Ada sat opposite Gavin, who seemed unusually composed, his every gesture deliberate. Joyce served the meal with her usual efficiency, but Ada noticed the brief glances she exchanged with Gavin. The unspoken communication between the two was becoming harder to ignore. "Miss Green," Gavin began, breaking the silence, "how are you finding the work so far? I trust everything is to your satisfaction?" "It's going well," Ada replied carefully. "May is stable, and I'm becoming familiar with her routine." "Good," Gavin said, his tone measured. "Her care is paramount to us. I'm sure you understand." "I do," Ada said, forcing a polite smile. Beneath the surface, she bristled at his words. The contrast between his apparent concern and the forged documents she had seen earlier was glaring. She decided to test the waters. "Though I did notice some inconsistencies in her records, I'll need to review them further to ensure everything is aligned with her care needs." For a fraction of a second, Gavin's expression faltered. It was almost imperceptible, but Ada caught the flicker of annoyance in his eyes before he composed himself. "I'm sure everything is in order. Joyce handles most of the paperwork and she's very thorough." Joyce, standing by the sideboard, stiffened slightly at the mention of her name. "Of course," she said quickly. "If you need anything clarified, just let me know." Ada nodded, letting the conversation drop. She couldn't afford to tip her hand too early, but the reaction from both Gavin and Joyce confirmed her suspicions. They were hiding something, and they were growing wary of her presence. Later that night, after the house had gone quiet, Ada slipped out of her room and returned to May's bedside. She had prepared a small flashlight and a notebook, determined to document any signs of May's awareness. She spoke softly as she worked, testing simple commands and recording May's responses. "May, if you can hear me, move your fingers twice," Ada whispered. A long pause, then 2 faint twitches. Ada's breath caught as she jotted it down. "Good. Now, if you feel safe, move them once." This time, there was no movement. Ada frowned, her mind racing. Was May trying to tell her she felt unsafe? The implications sent a chill through her. As Ada continued her tests, a soft creak came from the hallway. She froze, her hand stilling over her notebook. The sound was faint but distinct, the unmistakable shuffle of footsteps outside the door. Someone was there, listening. Ada quickly dimmed the flashlight and moved to the door, pressing her ear against the wood. The footsteps retreated, growing fainter until they disappeared entirely. Her heart pounded in her chest as she returned to the bedside, her resolve hardening. "We're not alone in this, May," she whispered. "But I won't let them win. I promise." As the night deepened, Ada couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. The walls of Beaumont Manor seemed to close in tighter with every passing hour, and the shadows grew darker. Yet amidst the danger there was one certainty. May was counting on her, and Ada wasn't about to let her down. The morning sun barely penetrated the thick curtains of May's room as Ada sat at the small desk, poring over her notes from the previous night. Every observation, every twitch of May's fingers was meticulously documented. Ada knew she was assembling pieces of a much larger puzzle, but the picture they formed was still incomplete. Her frustration was compounded by the lingering sense of unease that had settled over the household. A sharp knock on the door jolted her from her thoughts. She turned to see William stepping inside, his expression tense but determined. "Miss Green," he began in a low voice, glancing over his shoulder to ensure no one was listening. We need to talk. Ada motioned for him to close the door and stepped away from the desk. What is it? She asked, her tone mirroring his urgency. I did some digging last night, William said, lowering his voice further. Gavin's study. There's more in there than just financial records. He's keeping something hidden, something about May's condition. I couldn't get to it, but I know it's there. Ada's mind raced as she processed his words. The study had already been a point of suspicion, and this only confirmed her fears. Do you know where he keeps the key? She asked. William hesitated, then nodded. In the drawer of his desk. He keeps it locked, but I know the combination. The problem is getting in there without him or Joyce noticing. Ada considered their options. Breaking into Gavin's study was a risky move, but if it held the answers they needed, it was a risk worth taking. When's the best time to try? She asked. Late evening, William replied. Gavin spends most of his nights in the drawing room, and Joyce is usually occupied with the household accounts. It's the only time the study is empty. Then we'll do it tonight, Ada said, her voice firm. I'll handle it. William's brow furrowed. Are you sure? It's dangerous. I don't have a choice, Ada said, glancing toward May's bed. May doesn't have time for us to play it safe. William nodded, his jaw tightening. I'll cover for you if anyone asks where you are. As the plan solidified, Ada's resolve only grew. She spent the rest of the day preparing, rehearsing the steps in her mind, and double-checking her notes. If everything went as planned, they would finally have the evidence they needed to confront Gavin, or, at the very least, to protect May. When the evening arrived, Ada waited until the household settled into its usual routine. Gavin's deep voice echoed faintly from the drawing room, and Joyce's footsteps clattered down the hallway toward the kitchen. Ada slipped quietly out of May's room, her heart pounding with every step she took toward the study. The door to the study loomed ahead, a dark silhouette in the dimly lit hallway. Ada hesitated for a moment, glancing around to ensure no one was watching. Then, with a deep breath, she turned the knob and stepped inside. The study was eerily silent, the air thick with the faint scent of leather and tobacco. The desk sat in the center of the room, an imposing structure that seemed to guard its secrets fiercely. Ada approached it cautiously, her hands trembling slightly as she tried the handle of the drawer. Locked. Recalling William's instructions, Ada knelt by the desk and entered the combination he had provided. The lock clicked open, and Ada carefully slid the drawer out. Inside, a small, unassuming key lay atop a pile of neatly arranged papers. She grabbed it quickly and turned her attention to the locked cabinet at the side of the room. The sound of footsteps in the hallway made her freeze. Ada's heart raced as she waited, every nerve in her body on edge. The footsteps paused outside the door before continuing down the hall. Letting out a shaky breath, Ada turned the key in the cabinet lock and opened it. Inside, rows of folders and notebooks filled the shelves, their labels ominously vague. May, incident, medical expenses, and treatment protocols. Ada reached for the folder marked May Incident and opened it, her breath catching at the sight of the first page. The document was a police report detailing May's accident, but something about it was off. The details were vague, and several sections had been redacted. As Ada scanned further, she found photos, grainy, black and white images of the crash site. But what stood out most was a handwritten note scrawled across one of the pages. Maintain control at all costs. Ada's blood ran cold. Whatever had happened to May wasn't just an accident, it was part of a calculated plan. Ada flipped through the folder with increasing urgency, her mind racing to piece together the implications of what she was seeing. Beyond the cryptic note, there were additional documents, emails and financial records that pointed to a disturbing conclusion. One transaction in particular caught her attention, a substantial payment made to a private physician shortly after May's accident. The recipient's name, Dr. Harris, matched the doctor listed on May's medical records. The timing and amount suggested that the arrangement wasn't entirely legitimate. Her hands trembling, Ada carefully tucked the documents back into the folder. She needed time to review everything more thoroughly, but staying in the study for too long was too dangerous. She slid the folder into her bag, making sure it was well concealed, and quietly closed the cabinet. As she turned to leave, her heart skipped a beat. She had left the drawer of Gavin's desk slightly ajar. Rushing to fix the oversight, she pushed the drawer back into place, making sure the lock clicked shut. She stepped away from the desk and surveyed the room one last time, ensuring everything looked as it had before. Satisfied, she slipped out of the study and into the dark hallway, her footsteps as light as possible. As she made her way back to May's room, Ada couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her. The shadows seemed deeper, the silence heavier. She resisted the urge to look over her shoulder, knowing that giving in to fear would only make her more vulnerable. Still, her grip on the strap of her bag tightened, her thoughts consumed by the damning evidence now in her possession. When she finally reached May's room, she closed the door behind her and leaned against it, taking a moment to catch her breath. The weight of what she had found pressed down on her, a mixture of relief and dread. She moved to the bedside and glanced at May, her serene expression unchanged. "We're getting closer," Ada whispered, her voice trembling with a mix of determination and fear. "They can't hide this forever." Sitting at the small desk, she pulled out the folder and began examining its contents in greater detail. The redacted police report, the payment to Dr. Harris, the handwritten note, they all pointed to a carefully orchestrated scheme. But the most shocking revelation was buried near the bottom of the folder, a witness statement from someone who had been at the scene of the accident. The statement was brief but damning. The witness claimed to have seen another car near the crash site, one that left the scene before authorities arrived. The description of the vehicle matched one of Gavin's cars, a fact Ada confirmed by glancing at a photograph on the mantel of the study earlier that evening. It was no coincidence. Her breath quickened as the implications sank in. Gavin hadn't just been complicit in keeping May in a vegetative state. He may have been directly involved in causing her condition in the first place. Ada's thoughts were interrupted by a soft sound behind her. She turned sharply, her heart pounding, but it was only the faint rustle of May's blankets as the evening breeze filtered through the slightly open window. Still, the moment served as a reminder of how precarious her position had become. She knew she couldn't confront Gavin yet. Without a solid plan and more allies, it would be her word against his, and he had both power and influence on his side. Ada would need to tread carefully, ensuring that every step she took brought her closer to exposing the truth while keeping herself and May safe. As she secured the folder back in her bag, a faint creak echoed from the hallway. Ada froze, listening intently. The sound grew louder, closer, until it stopped just outside May's door. Her pulse thundered in her ears as the doorknob turned slowly, and the door opened a crack. To her relief, it was William. He slipped inside quickly, closing the door behind him. "Did you find anything?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Ada nodded, pulling the folder from her bag and handing it to him. "It's worse than we thought," she said, explaining the details of what she had uncovered. "Gavin's been covering this up from the start. I think he orchestrated the accident." William's face darkened as he flipped through the folder, his hands shaking slightly. This is enough to bring him down," he said, his voice trembling with a mix of anger and determination. "But we need to be smart about this. If he finds out you've seen this—" "I know," Ada interrupted, her tone firm. We need to act carefully. I'm going to document May's progress further. If we can show she's aware, it'll strengthen our case. William nodded, his expression resolute. I'll handle the legal side. There are people I can trust who will take this seriously. But we need to move fast. Gavin won't sit idly by if he suspects anything. As William tucked the folder under his arm and prepared to leave, he turned back to Ada. Be careful, Miss Green. You've done more for May than anyone else has, but this house is dangerous. Don't underestimate Gavin or Joyce. I won't, Ada said, her voice steady. We'll get through this. As William slipped out into the hallway, Ada sat back down at the desk, her resolve hardening. The truth was within reach, but the path ahead was treacherous. She glanced at May, her fingers twitching faintly against the sheets, and felt a renewed sense of purpose. Whatever it took, she would uncover the full truth and make sure Gavin paid for what he had done. The morning air was heavy with tension as Ada began her routine in May's room. The weight of the previous night's discovery lingered, each detail replaying in her mind as she checked May's vitals and adjusted her IV drip. The knowledge that Gavin was likely responsible for May's condition made every interaction with him more fraught, every passing moment more precarious. As Ada leaned over May, she whispered softly, I don't know how long we can keep this up, but we're closer to the truth now. You're stronger than they think, and we'll prove it. May's fingers twitched slightly, and Ada's heart lifted at the response. It was a small gesture, but it reminded her that May was still fighting, even in her silence. She returned to her notepad, carefully documenting every observation. If there was any hope of securing May's freedom, they would need undeniable proof of her awareness and the manipulation surrounding her care. Midway through her notes, a soft knock interrupted her focus. Ada turned to see Joyce stepping into the room, her face betraying no emotion. She carried a tray with May's morning medication, placing it on the bedside table with a practiced motion. "How's May this morning?" Joyce asked, her tone casual, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of curiosity. "She's stable," Ada replied, keeping her voice neutral. "No significant changes." Joyce nodded, her gaze lingering on May for a moment before shifting to Ada. "Let me know if you need anything," she said, her voice polite but distant. As she turned to leave, Ada noticed her hesitation at the door, a momentary pause that set Ada's nerves on edge. Once Joyce was gone, Ada turned her attention to the tray. Her suspicions about the lavender-colored capsule from the day before hadn't waned. Carefully, she removed it and placed it in a small, resealable bag she had prepared, determined to have it tested later. She substituted the capsule with an identical placebo she had brought from her own supplies, ensuring that May's condition wouldn't be affected. The subtle swap complete, Ada sat back down and resumed her notes. She knew she couldn't afford to make a mistake. Any slip-up could draw suspicion and jeopardize everything. As she wrote, her thoughts turned to Gavin and his tightening grip on the household. He seemed to sense that something was shifting, his presence becoming more oppressive with each passing day. Ada felt it every time he appeared, a weight in the air, a constant reminder of the danger they were in. Her resolve only deepened. Whatever Gavin was hiding, she was determined to expose it. But she couldn't do it alone. Ada's thoughts turned to William, the only ally she had in the house. She needed to update him on her progress and coordinate their next steps, but doing so without arousing suspicion would require careful timing. As the day wore on, the tension in the house seemed to thicken. Ada caught fleeting glances from Joyce in the hallways, each one filled with unspoken questions. Even Gavin's polite facade seemed thinner, as though he were watching her more closely, searching for cracks in her composure. Despite the growing pressure, Ada refused to falter. She returned to May's bedside, her voice soft but firm. "We're going to get through this, May. I just need you to keep fighting. Cam on ban jan hak, toi hiun ham. Chung ta se tiep tuch trien kai pan hai, qua chuang sao trong outline siba. Jai la joan tiep noi mot kach lien mak." Ada's hands trembled slightly as she tucked the folder back into her bag. The enormity of what she had uncovered threatened to overwhelm her, but she pushed the emotions aside. There was no room for hesitation now. She had to act, and she had to act quickly. May's faint signs of awareness weren't just a breakthrough, they were a lifeline, both for May and for exposing Gavin's dark secrets. The faint creak of footsteps outside May's door startled her, and she froze. The sound stopped, and for a moment the silence was deafening. Then, with a slow and deliberate turn, the doorknob moved. Ada's pulse thundered in her ears as the door opened. It was Joyce. She stepped inside, her expression neutral, but her eyes sharp as they flicked between Ada and May. "Still working late, Miss Green?" she asked, her voice carrying a note of polite suspicion. "I wanted to ensure everything was set for tomorrow morning," Ada replied smoothly, forcing a calm demeanor. "May's condition requires constant vigilance." Joyce stepped closer, her gaze lingering on May for a moment before shifting back to Ada. "You're very dedicated," she said, her tone flat. "Not everyone would take such an interest." Ada resisted the urge to react, keeping her expression neutral. "I've always believed in going above and beyond for my patients." Joyce's lips curled into a faint smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. "That's admirable. Just be careful not to wear yourself out. This house can be draining." The weight of her words hung in the air, and Ada knew there was more to them than mere concern. Before she could respond, Joyce turned and walked to the bedside, adjusting May's blanket with practiced ease. "She's lucky to have you," Joyce said, her voice softer now. "Not everyone would care so much." Ada's stomach tightened. The shift in Joyce's tone felt calculated, like a predator circling its prey. "Thank you," she said quietly, watching Joyce's every move. After a moment, Joyce straightened and stepped back. "I'll leave you to it," she said, her sharp gaze meeting Ada's one last time before she turned and left the room. The tension in the air lingered long after Joyce was gone. Ada exhaled slowly, her grip on the edge of the desk tightening. Joyce was clearly watching her, and Ada couldn't afford to let her guard down. Turning back to May, Ada knelt by the bedside and whispered, "We're running out of time, but I won't let them stop us." May's fingers twitched faintly, a silent acknowledgement that spurred Ada's resolve. Gathering her notes and the evidence she had collected, Ada prepared for the next step. Whatever danger lay ahead, she was ready to face it, for May's sake and for the truth. The house was unusually quiet that evening, the kind of silence that seemed to amplify every creak of the floorboards and whisper of the wind outside. Ada moved carefully, her every step deliberate as she made her way back to the study. The key she had retrieved earlier hung heavy in her pocket, a reminder of the risk she was about to take. She paused at the door to the study, pressing her ear against the wood to listen for any sounds inside. Nothing. Slowly she turned the knob and stepped into the dark room, closing the door softly behind her. The air smelled faintly of leather and tobacco, and the only light came from the moon filtering through the half-drawn curtains. Ada quickly crossed to the cabinet, pulling the key from her pocket. Her hands shook slightly as she turned the lock and opened the door. Inside, rows of files and notebooks lined the shelves, meticulously labeled in Gavin's neat handwriting. Her eyes immediately fell on a folder labeled May Incident Reports. Pulling the folder free, she flipped it open and began scanning the documents. The first few pages were police reports, But as she delved deeper, the nature of the contents changed. She found detailed logs of May's medications, discrepancies in the treatment orders, and notes about specific drug interactions, most of which seemed designed to keep May in a near comatose state. One note, scrawled in the margins of a page, caught her attention. Ensure compliance. Full recovery would be problematic. Ada's stomach churned as the pieces began falling into place. The medications weren't meant to help May. They were meant to suppress her. Whatever had happened to May wasn't an accident. Gavin had orchestrated this, and Joyce had been complicit in carrying out the plan. Her thoughts were interrupted by the faint creak of a floorboard behind her. She spun around, her heart hammering in her chest. The room was empty, but the door to the study was now slightly ajar. She froze, clutching the folder to her chest as she strained to listen for any sound. Someone had been there. Someone had seen her. Ada quickly replaced the folder and locked the cabinet, her movement swift but precise. She couldn't afford to leave any evidence of her intrusion. As she slipped the key back into her pocket, she turned to leave, her mind racing with questions. Who had been watching her? And what would they do now that they knew she was digging into the truth? Stepping out into the hallway, Ada made her way back toward May's room, keeping to the shadows and listening carefully for any signs of movement. Her paranoia was justified. The stakes had never been higher. As she approached the door to May's room, she noticed a figure standing at the far end of the hallway. It was Joyce. The housekeeper stood perfectly still, her silhouette illuminated by the faint glow of a nearby lamp. For a moment, neither of them moved, the tension between them palpable. Then Joyce turned and walked away without a word, disappearing into the shadows. Ada slipped into May's room and locked the door behind her, her breath coming in shallow gasps. The documents she had seen confirmed her worst fears, but they also gave her the evidence she needed to confront Gavin. The only question was whether she could do it before he realized just how much she knew. She approached May's bedside and knelt down, her voice trembling but resolute. "I found it, May, the proof we need, but now it's even more dangerous. They know I'm getting close." May remained still, but her fingers twitched faintly against the sheet, a silent response that strengthened Ada's resolve. "I'll protect you," she whispered, "no matter what it takes." The silence in May's room felt heavier than ever as Ada sat at the small desk, her mind racing with the implications of what she had uncovered. The note, the altered medications, the careful documentation of every step to suppress May's recovery. It all painted a chilling picture. Gavin's control over the household wasn't just manipulative, it was methodical and deliberate. Ada's thoughts were interrupted by a sudden knock at the door. The sound was sharp and purposeful, sending a jolt of fear through her. She rose slowly, her hand instinctively brushing against the edge of her bag where she had hidden her notes from the study. "Who is it?" she called, trying to keep her voice steady. "It's me," came William's hushed voice from the other side. Ada exhaled in relief and quickly unlocked the door, letting him in. He looked tense, his face lined with worry. "I saw Joyce lingering near the study earlier," he said without preamble. "She's suspicious, Ada. If she hasn't already told Gavin, she will soon." Ada nodded, her jaw tightening. "I think she knows I've been digging. She was watching me earlier, and she didn't even try to hide it." William glanced toward May's bed, his expression softening for a moment before hardening again. "We don't have much time. Did you find anything?" Ada retrieved her notebook and quickly explained what she had seen in the folder. The discrepancies in the medical orders, the deliberate use of drugs to suppress May's recovery, and the cryptic note about compliance. William's expression darkened with every word. "God help us," he muttered. "If this gets out, if people find out what Gavin's done." "They have to find out," Ada said firmly. May deserves the truth, and so do you, but we need to be careful. Gavin has too much to lose to let this go quietly. William nodded, though his hands were trembling slightly. What do you suggest? We need more than just the documents, Ada said. We need proof that May is aware, that she's recovering. If we can show that, it'll undermine everything Gavin's been trying to hide. William's gaze shifted to May, his expression a mix of hope and fear. Do you think she can do it? Show them she's still in there? She's already shown me, Ada said, her voice steady. But it'll take time to document it in a way that's undeniable. Until then, we need to keep what we know hidden. If Gavin suspects we're planning to expose him— William didn't need her to finish the sentence. He'll act, he said grimly, and not in May's best interest. Ada placed a reassuring hand on his arm. I'll stay with May tonight. If anything happens, I'll be here. William nodded reluctantly. Be careful, Miss Green. You've done more for May than anyone else, but that makes you a target. As William slipped out of the room, Ada turned back to May, her resolve hardening. She retrieved a small flashlight and began testing May's responses again, documenting every twitch of her fingers, every subtle movement of her eyes. Each sign of awareness was another step closer to proving the truth. Hours passed, and the house grew still. The faint sound of the wind outside and the rhythmic beeping of May's monitors were the only noises to break the silence. But Ada couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that the walls themselves were conspiring against her. She glanced at the door, ensuring it was still locked, and then returned to May's bedside. I need you to keep fighting, May, she whispered. Whatever happens, don't give up. We're going to make this right. May's fingers twitched in response, and Ada felt a surge of determination. The road ahead was perilous, but she wasn't alone in this fight. May was with her, in her own quiet way, and together they would face whatever came next. The air in May's room felt heavy as Ada sat by her bedside, the faint glow of a desk lamp illuminating the quiet space. The house was silent, but Ada couldn't shake the feeling that something was brewing beneath the surface, an invisible tension that seemed to tighten with each passing hour. She watched May closely, her gaze fixed on the faint movements of her patient's fingers. Every response May gave felt like a small victory, a reminder that she was still there, fighting to be heard. But Ada knew it wasn't enough. May's subtle movements needed to be undeniable proof, something that couldn't be dismissed or explained away. May, Ada whispered softly, leaning closer, I need you to help me. If you can hear me, I want you to try something new. Can you move your fingers twice for yes? A long pause followed, and for a moment Ada thought she might be asking too much. Then, slowly, May's fingers twitched twice against the blanket. Ada's heart leapt, and she quickly jotted the response down in her notebook. This was progress, but it needed to be more definitive. She hesitated before trying again. May, if you feel safe right now, move your fingers once. This time, there was no movement. The lack of response sent a chill through Ada. Did May feel unsafe, or was she simply unable to respond in the moment? Ada bit her lip, unsure whether to press further, but her instincts told her to stop. Forcing May could set her back, and Ada couldn't risk that. Ada closed her notebook and sat back, rubbing her temples as the weight of the situation pressed down on her. She had spent the past few days piecing together the truth about what had happened to May, but the closer she got, the more dangerous it became. Joyce's growing suspicion and Gavin's ever-watchful presence made every step feel like walking a tightrope. A knock at the door made her freeze. She stood, her pulse quickening, and approached cautiously. "Who is it?" she asked. "It's me," came a soft voice. "William." Ada unlocked the door and let him in, relief washing over her as he stepped inside. He carried a folder under his arm and wore an expression that was equal parts determination and anxiety. "I found something," he said, his voice low. "In Gavin's office. He's been moving assets around, transferring money to offshore accounts." Ada's brow furrowed as she processed the information. "What does that have to do with May?" "Everything," William said, setting the folder on the desk and opening it. Inside were bank statements and legal documents, all pointing to a larger scheme. If May recovers, she regains control of the estate. Gavin stands to lose everything if that happens. That's why he's keeping her like this, so he can bleed the estate dry without anyone stopping him. Ada's stomach turned as the pieces began falling into place. Gavin's manipulation of May's condition wasn't just about control, it was about greed. "He's trying to make sure she never gets the chance to fight back," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. William nodded grimly. "Exactly. And if he finds out you know this—" He didn't finish the thought, but the implication was clear. Gavin wouldn't hesitate to eliminate any threat to his plans. Ada's mind raced as she considered their options. They had the documents, May's signs of awareness, and her growing recovery. But it still felt fragile, like a house of cards waiting to collapse at the slightest provocation. They needed something more, something that would force Gavin's hand and protect May once and for all. "We have to act fast," Ada said, her voice firm. "But we need to be smart. If we make a move before we're ready, Gavin will destroy any chance we have." William hesitated, his eyes flickering to May. "What do you need from me?" "For now, keep these documents safe," Ada said, gesturing to the folder. "I'll keep working with May to document her progress. If we can show she's aware, it'll make everything else undeniable." William nodded, though his expression remained troubled. "Be careful, Ada. Gavin's dangerous. You're risking everything by staying here." Ada met his gaze, her resolve unshaken. "I know, but May's worth it." The night deepened, and the mansion seemed to grow darker with it. After William left, Ada locked the door and returned to her desk, her mind racing with thoughts of what their next move should be. The documents William had uncovered were damning, but they wouldn't mean anything if Gavin discovered their plans before they were ready to expose him. She glanced at May, her expression softening. The faint rise and fall of her chest, the small movements of her fingers, everything about May screamed of someone fighting to come back to life. And Gavin was doing everything in his power to stop her. Ada sat beside May's bed, pulling out her notebook to record the night's interactions. The small victories, the twitches, the slight eye movements felt monumental, but they also weighed heavily on her. With every sign of progress May showed, Ada's sense of urgency grew. The clock was ticking, and the walls of Beaumont Manor seemed to close in tighter with each passing day. As she wrote, a noise from the hallway made her freeze. It was faint at first, a soft, shuffling sound, but it grew louder. Footsteps. Someone was approaching May's room. Ada extinguished the lamp on the desk and slipped into the shadows, her pulse racing as she watched the door. The footsteps stopped just outside, and the doorknob turned slowly. Ada held her breath, gripping the edge of the desk for support. The door creaked open, and Joyce stepped inside, her silhouette illuminated by the faint glow of the hallway light. "Still awake, Miss Green?" Joyce's voice was soft, but carried a sharp undertone. She stepped further into the room, her eyes scanning the space until they landed on Ada. "I couldn't sleep," Ada replied calmly, stepping into the faint light. "I was documenting May's progress. It helps me focus." Joyce's gaze lingered on her for a moment, then shifted to May. She approached the bedside, her movements deliberate as she adjusted the blanket. "She looks peaceful, doesn't she? Like nothing in the world could bother her." Ada tensed at the words. There was something almost mocking in Joyce's tone, a subtle jab that hinted at the truth they both knew. "She's strong," Ada said, choosing her words carefully. "I can see it in the way she responds. She's fighting." Joyce glanced at her, one eyebrow raised. "Fighting," she repeated, almost amused. "Well, let's hope her fight isn't in vain. It would be such a shame for all your hard work to amount to nothing." The veiled threat in Joyce's words was unmistakable, and Ada felt her jaw tighten. She forced herself to remain calm, meeting Joyce's gaze evenly. "I'm confident May will recover, and when she does, she'll have the strength to face whatever comes next." For a moment, neither woman spoke, the tension between them thick enough to cut. Then Joyce smiled, a thin, calculating smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Let's hope so," she said softly before turning and leaving the room. As the door clicked shut behind her, Ada exhaled shakily, her hands trembling. Joyce's visit wasn't just a coincidence, it was a warning. They were watching her more closely than ever, and the risk of being caught was growing with each passing moment. Ada turned back to May, her resolve hardening. "We're running out of time," she whispered, "but I'm not giving up. No matter what they try, I'll find a way to protect you." May's fingers twitched faintly in response, a small but powerful affirmation that fueled Ada's determination. She knew the battle ahead wouldn't be easy, but she also knew she wasn't fighting it alone. Together, they would expose the truth and ensure that Gavin's grip on May would be broken for good. The morning came with an oppressive heaviness, the kind that seemed to linger in the very air of Beaumont Manor. Ada awoke to the muffled sounds of footsteps in the hallway outside May's room. She sat up quickly, her senses immediately alert. Something felt off, more so than usual. As she moved toward the door, a sharp knock startled her. She opened it cautiously to find William standing there, his face pale and lined with worry. "What's wrong?" Ada asked, her voice hushed. "Gavin's called a meeting," William replied, glancing nervously down the hallway. "He wants everyone in the drawing room. Now." Ada's stomach churned. Gavin rarely called for such formalities. His usual approach was to maintain control through silence and subtle manipulation, not direct confrontation. Whatever this meeting was about, it couldn't be good. "I'll be there," she said, her voice steady despite the unease gripping her. William nodded and left, leaving Ada to quickly prepare herself. She glanced at May, still lying peacefully in her bed, and whispered, "I'll be back soon. Stay strong." The drawing room was as imposing as ever when Ada entered, the ornate furnishings and heavy drapes adding to the sense of suffocation she felt. Gavin stood near the fireplace, his posture rigid, while Joyce hovered by the doorway, her expression as unreadable as always. William was already seated, his hands clenched tightly in his lap. "Thank you for joining us," Gavin said smoothly as Ada stepped inside. His tone was polite, but there was an edge to it that set her nerves on edge. "I thought it was time we had a conversation about the recent changes in the household." Ada took a seat, her heart pounding. "Changes?" she asked carefully. "Yes," Gavin replied, his gaze sharp as it settled on her. "I've noticed that certain routines have shifted. Medications being administered at slightly different times, notes being taken that weren't previously part of May's care regimen." Ada's pulse quickened. He knew, or at least he suspected. "I've been documenting May's progress," she said, keeping her voice calm. "As her nurse, it's my responsibility to monitor her condition closely and adjust as needed." "And has she shown progress?" Gavin asked, his tone almost mocking. Ada hesitated. She could feel the weight of Joyce's stare from across the room, the tension in William's posture beside her. "It's too early to say definitively," she replied, choosing her words carefully. "But I believe there are signs of improvement." Gavin's lips curled into a thin smile. "How optimistic of you, Miss Green. I'm sure your efforts are appreciated. However, I would caution against raising false hopes. May's condition is delicate, and any unnecessary interference could do more harm than good." The warning in his words was clear, and Ada felt a surge of defiance rise within her. She met his gaze evenly, refusing to back down. "I assure you, Mr. Beaumont, every decision I make is in May's best interest." "Let's hope so," Gavin said, his smile fading. He straightened, his tone turning colder. "Because I won't tolerate negligence or insubordination in this house." The meeting ended abruptly after that, Gavin dismissing them with a wave of his hand. As Ada rose to leave, she caught William's eye and saw the fear etched into his face. He lingered for a moment, as though wanting to say something, but then thought better of it and followed Gavin out of the room. Ada returned to May's room, her thoughts racing. Gavin's pointed remarks had been more than just a warning, they were a declaration of intent. He was watching her closely now, and any misstep could bring his wrath down on her and May both. She sat beside the bed, gripping May's hand tightly. "They're closing in," she whispered. "But we're not done yet, not even close." The hours after the meeting passed in tense silence, with Ada feeling Gavin's shadow looming over every move she made. She stayed close to May's side, determined to shield her from whatever Gavin might try next. The memory of his cold words in the drawing room played over in her mind, a warning that danger was no longer distant. It was here. As dusk began to settle, Ada heard a faint knock at the door. She opened it cautiously, relieved to see William standing there again. This time, his expression was darker, his shoulders tense with urgency. "We need to talk," he said quietly, stepping inside. He glanced around the room before closing the door behind him. Gavin's growing suspicious. He's tightening his grip on everything. "I noticed," Ada replied, her voice tinged with frustration. "He practically accused me of interfering with May's care." William nodded grimly. "He doesn't just suspect you, Ada. He's already started taking precautions. I overheard him talking to Joyce earlier. He's considering moving May to a private facility." The words hit Ada like a blow. "What?" she whispered, her voice sharp with disbelief. "Why would he do that?" "To isolate her," William said. "If she's removed from this house, he'll have complete control. No witnesses, no interference. He can keep her in that state for as long as he wants without anyone asking questions." Ada's stomach churned as the implications sank in. "We can't let that happen," she said, her voice resolute. "If he takes her away, we'll lose any chance of proving what he's done." "I know," William said, his tone equally firm. "But we need a plan. Something concrete to stop him before he can act." Ada paced the room, her mind racing. "The documents you found, the financial records, the transfers to offshore accounts. If we expose those, it could force him into a corner." William hesitated. "That might work, but we need to do it carefully. If Gavin suspects we're going public with this, he'll destroy the evidence and come after us." Ada nodded, her resolve hardening. "Then we gather everything we have and find someone outside the house we can trust, someone with the power to take him down." "There's a lawyer in town," William said, his voice steady but cautious. "An old friend of May's family. He's been out of touch since the accident, but if anyone could help, it's him. I'll contact him discreetly." "Good," Ada said, relief washing over her. "In the meantime, I'll keep working with May. If we can document her awareness, something undeniable, it'll strengthen our case." William's expression softened slightly as he looked at May. "She's lucky to have you, Ada. You've done more for her in a few weeks than anyone else has in months." Ada met his gaze, her determination unwavering. She deserves the truth, and I won't stop until she gets it." As William left to make his call, Ada turned back to May. She knelt by the bedside, taking May's hand in hers. "You're not going anywhere," she whispered. "Not until we make this right." That night, Ada stayed by May's side, her notebook open and pen in hand. She recorded every response May gave, no matter how small, knowing each one was a step closer to the truth. The hours passed slowly, the weight of the house pressing down on her, but she refused to let fear take hold. When the first light of dawn crept through the curtains, Ada sat back, exhaustion pulling at her limbs. May's hand twitched faintly, and for a moment Ada thought she saw the slightest flicker of movement in her eyelids. It was enough to rekindle her hope. "We're going to stop him," Ada said softly, "no matter what it takes." In the quiet of the morning, as the house began to stir, Ada knew the battle was far from over. But with May's silent strength and William's growing determination, she felt a glimmer of hope that they could still turn the tide and bring Gavin's plans crashing down. Ada sat at the small desk in May's room, reviewing her notes by the dim glow of the bedside lamp. Her mind raced with thoughts of the upcoming plan, how fragile it was, how easily it could fall apart if Gavin grew even slightly more suspicious. The documents William had uncovered were damning, but they still needed a definitive piece to tie everything together, undeniable proof that May was conscious and aware. She glanced at May, who lay still under the soft glow of the monitors. "You're the key to all of this," Ada murmured softly. "If we can show them you're still here, they'll have no choice but to listen." The faint sound of footsteps in the hallway pulled her from her thoughts. Ada tensed, her heart racing as she listened. The steps stopped outside May's door, and the doorknob turned. She braced herself, but it was only William. He slipped inside quickly, closing the door behind him. "I've spoken to the lawyer," William said in a hushed tone, his face pale but determined. "He's willing to help, but he needs everything we have. The financial records, the medical notes, proof of May's awareness. He said the more airtight our case, the harder it will be for Gavin to refute." Ada nodded, her mind already cataloguing what they had and what they still needed. "May's awareness is the linchpin," she said. "If we can capture something concrete, like her responding to specific commands, it'll be undeniable." William's brow furrowed, and he glanced at May. "Do you think she's strong enough for that? To respond consistently?" "She's stronger than they think," Ada replied firmly. "But we need to do it carefully. If we push too hard, it could set her back." William hesitated before nodding. "Then we'll need to act fast. Gavin's planning something, I can feel it. We don't have much time." Ada agreed, though the weight of the situation pressed heavily on her. Every moment they delayed gave Gavin more opportunity to tighten his grip, to move May to a private facility where she'd be completely isolated. She couldn't let that happen. As they finalized their plan, a loud crash echoed from downstairs, followed by raised voices. Ada and William exchanged a startled glance before hurrying to the door. They crept into the hallway, the sound of Gavin's voice growing louder with each step. "You think I don't know what you're doing?" Gavin's voice was sharp and venomous, cutting through the air like a blade. "You've been snooping around my study, haven't you?" Ada's stomach dropped. Had someone seen her in the study the night before, or had Gavin found out through Joyce? She and William moved cautiously toward the staircase, peering down into the foyer where Gavin stood, his face twisted with anger. Joyce stood a few feet away, her expression carefully neutral, though there was a tension in her posture. She said nothing as Gavin continued his tirade, his words directed at one of the household staff who looked terrified. "Do you know what happens to people who betray me?" Gavin snarled, his voice lowering to a menacing tone. "I don't tolerate disloyalty." Ada's grip on the banister tightened as she watched, her heart pounding. This was the side of Gavin he had kept hidden behind his polished exterior, a man who would stop at nothing to maintain control. She exchanged a glance with William, whose face was ashen. They retreated back down the hallway, Ada's mind racing. Gavin's growing paranoia was escalating, and it was only a matter of time before he turned his full attention on her and William. They needed to act now, before it was too late. Ada and William hurried back to May's room, closing the door softly behind them. The encounter downstairs had rattled them both, but there was no time to dwell on fear. Gavin's growing paranoia was a sign. They were getting too close to the truth, and he knew it. "We need to move quickly," Ada said, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside her. "If he's willing to turn on his own staff, he won't think twice about coming after us?" William nodded, though his face was pale. "What do you suggest?" "We focus on May," Ada replied. "If we can capture proof of her awareness tonight, we can take it to the lawyer tomorrow. It's the strongest evidence we have, and it's the one thing Gavin can't manipulate." William hesitated, then glanced at May. "Do you really think she can do it?" "I know she can," Ada said firmly. "We just have to guide her carefully. She's already shown she can respond. It's just a matter of consistency." William sighed deeply, but nodded. "All right. What do you need me to do?" "Keep watch," Ada said. "If Gavin or Joyce comes upstairs, warn me. I'll handle everything else." As William took his post by the door, Ada turned her full attention to May. She knelt by the bedside, her notebook and flashlight ready. "May," she whispered, her voice calm but resolute, "I need your help. This is important. More important than anything we've done so far. Can you try to respond for me?" She waited, holding her breath. For a moment, there was nothing, and Ada felt the first flicker of doubt creep in. Then, slowly, May's fingers twitched against the sheet. It was faint but deliberate, and Ada felt a surge of hope. "Good," Ada said softly, her voice filled with encouragement. "I'm going to ask you a few questions. If the answer is yes, I want you to move your fingers twice. Can you do that?" Another pause, then 2 faint twitches. Ada's heart raced as she quickly jotted the response in her notebook. This was it, the breakthrough they needed. "Are you in pain, May?" Ada asked gently. 1 twitch. Number, "Do you feel safe right now?" This time, there was no movement. Ada frowned, her stomach tightening. May's lack of response spoke volumes. It wasn't a refusal. It was fear. Ada reached out, taking May's hand in hers. "It's okay," she whispered. "You're safe with me. No one's going to hurt you." Another faint twitch, as if May were trying to reassure her. Ada smiled, a flicker of hope cutting through the tension. She continued asking questions, documenting each response meticulously. Every twitch, every pause, painted a clearer picture of May's awareness, a picture that could shatter Gavin's lies. From his post by the door, William whispered urgently, "Someone's coming." Ada's blood ran cold. She quickly dimmed the flashlight and tucked her notebook into her bag, moving to stand by May's bed as the footsteps grew louder. The door opened, and Joyce stepped inside, her expression unreadable. "Burning the midnight oil, Miss Green?" Joyce asked, her tone neutral but her eyes sharp as they scanned the room. "I was checking on May," Ada replied calmly, refusing to let Joyce see her fear. "Her condition requires constant attention." Joyce's gaze lingered on her for a moment before shifting to May. "She's lucky to have you," she said, though her words carried a strange undertone, something between genuine praise and veiled menace. "But don't work yourself too hard. You'll burn out." Ada forced a polite smile. "Thank you for the advice. I'll keep that in mind." Joyce stayed a moment longer, then nodded and left, closing the door behind her. Ada exhaled slowly, her hands trembling slightly as she turned back to William. "They're on to us," William said grimly. "We have to finish this soon." Ada nodded, her resolve hardening. "We're close, William. We just have to hold on a little longer." She looked at May, her determination unwavering. "We're going to save you," she whispered, "no matter what it takes." The tension in the air was suffocating as Ada and William sat together in May's room, finalizing their plan. The evidence they had gathered was enough to expose Gavin, but the timing had to be perfect. Every step carried immense risk, and one misstep could unravel everything they'd worked for. "We'll need to contact the lawyer first thing in the morning," William said, his voice low but urgent. "He's already preparing to file an injunction to block Gavin from moving May to a private facility. Once we deliver the evidence, he'll act quickly." Ada nodded, her expression focused. "We need to document May's responses again tonight, something undeniable. Once we have that, we can leave as soon as it's safe." William hesitated, glancing toward the door. "Do you think we'll make it out without him noticing?" "We don't have a choice," Ada replied firmly. "Gavin is running out of time, and he knows it. If we wait any longer, he'll act." As William took his post by the door, Ada turned her attention to May. The room was dimly lit, the faint glow of the monitors casting soft shadows across the walls. Ada knelt by May's bedside, taking her hand gently. "May," she whispered, her voice steady but filled with urgency. "We're almost there. I need you to help me one more time. Can you do that?" May's fingers twitched faintly in response, and Ada felt a surge of hope. She reached for her notebook, her pen poised to record every detail. "Okay," she said softly. "If you can hear me, move your fingers twice." After a moment's pause, May's fingers moved, two deliberate twitches that left no room for doubt. Ada smiled, her heart pounding with relief. "Good, you're doing so well." The questions continued, each one met with consistent responses. May's awareness was undeniable now, and Ada knew it would be enough to convince the lawyer and a court if necessary. As she finished the final note, she looked at May with renewed determination. "You've done so much already," she whispered. "We're going to finish this, I promise." A sudden commotion from downstairs broke the moment. Raised voices echoed through the halls, sharp and angry. Ada and William exchanged a tense glance, and William moved toward the door, cracking it open slightly to listen. "It's Gavin," he said in a hushed tone, his face pale. "He's furious about something." Ada's stomach tightened. "Do you think he knows?" "I don't know," William replied, his voice tinged with fear. "But whatever it is, it's bad." Before Ada could respond, the sound of footsteps thundered up the staircase. William quickly shut the door, and Ada moved to May's bedside, her heart pounding. The footsteps grew louder, stopping just outside. The door flew open, and Gavin stepped inside, his face a mask of controlled rage. "What are you doing in here?" Gavin demanded, his eyes flicking between Ada and William. "I told you both to stay out of this room unless absolutely necessary." "I'm caring for May," Ada said calmly, though her hands trembled at her sides. "It's my job." Gavin's gaze hardened. "Your job is to follow orders, not to question them." William stepped forward, his voice firm despite the tremor in his hands. "Gavin, she's doing what's best for May. Maybe you should be asking yourself if you're doing the same." For a moment, the room was silent, the tension crackling like a live wire. Then Gavin's lips curled into a cold smile. "You've been meddling, haven't you?" he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Both of you." Ada met his gaze, refusing to back down. "Meddling? Number? But I've been doing everything I can to help May recover. That's what she deserves." Gavin's smile faded and his eyes narrowed. "You're playing a dangerous game, Miss Green. You have no idea who you're dealing with." Ada's heart raced, but she held her ground. "I know exactly who I'm dealing with, and I won't let you hurt May any longer." Gavin stepped closer, his presence imposing. "You think you can stop me? You're nothing more than a nurse with a misplaced sense of justice." Before Ada could respond, William moved between them. "You're not going to intimidate her, Gavin. Not this time." Gavin glared at William, his jaw tightening. "Get out of my way, old man," he spat. But William stood his ground, his expression resolute. The room seemed to shrink as Gavin stepped inside, his presence dominating the space. He closed the door behind him with a deliberate click, his sharp gaze moving between Ada and William. The calm facade he so often wore was gone, replaced by something far colder, calculated and menacing. "I wasn't aware we had a meeting scheduled," Gavin said, his tone dripping with mock politeness. "Care to enlighten me on what's so pressing?" Ada fought to steady her breathing, clutching the folder tightly in her hands. "I was reviewing May's care plan with William," she said, forcing her voice to remain calm. "There are some updates I thought he should be aware of." Gavin's eyes narrowed and he took a step closer. "Updates, you say? How thorough of you, Miss Green. But I can't help wondering why those updates are leaving the house." William shifted uncomfortably, his jaw tightening. "It's none of your concern, Gavin," he said, his voice firmer than Ada had expected. "May's care has been neglected for too long, and Ada's trying to rectify that." Gavin's attention turned to William, his expression hardening. "Neglected? That's an interesting choice of words coming from you. Tell me, Father, when was the last time you actually did anything useful for May? Or are you content to play the grieving parent while the rest of us handle the hard work?" William flinched, but he didn't back down. "This isn't about me, Gavin. It's about May and what you've done to her." The accusation hung in the air, and for a moment Gavin's composure faltered. His jaw tightened, and his hands curled into fists at his sides. "I don't know what lies you've been feeding each other," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "But I suggest you tread carefully. You're making accusations without evidence, and that's a dangerous game." Ada took a step forward, her grip on the folder tightening. "We have plenty of evidence, Mr. Beaumont," she said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. "Proof of May's awareness, proof of the financial discrepancies, and proof that you've been manipulating her condition to maintain control." Gavin's eyes snapped to her, his gaze cold and cutting. "You've overstepped, Miss Green," he said, his tone deadly quiet. "Do you have any idea what you're involving yourself in? What this could cost you?" Ada met his gaze without flinching. "I know exactly what I'm doing," she said, "and I'm not afraid of you." The tension in the room was suffocating, the air charged with unspoken threats. Gavin took a step closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "You should be." Before Ada could respond, the door behind Gavin opened and Joyce stepped inside. Her expression was guarded, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes as she glanced between the three of them. "Is everything all right?" Joyce asked, her voice carefully neutral. Gavin straightened, the mask of composure slipping back into place. "Everything's fine," he said smoothly. "I was just reminding Miss Green of her boundaries." Ada forced herself to stay calm, her mind racing. Joyce's arrival had diffused the immediate danger, but it was clear that the battle was far from over. Gavin's threats had made one thing abundantly clear. He wasn't going to let May go without a fight. "We're done here," Gavin said, his tone curt as he turned toward the door. "I trust you'll both remember where your loyalties lie." As he and Joyce left the room, Ada and William exchanged a tense glance. The confrontation had shaken them both, but it had also solidified their resolve. There was no turning back now. They had to act, and they had to act fast. Ada turned to William, her voice firm. "We leave tonight." William nodded, his expression grim. "Let's make sure we have everything we need, if we fail." "We won't," Ada said, cutting him off. "We can't." They gathered the documents and double-checked their plan, knowing that the next step would determine everything. The fight wasn't over, but they were ready to face whatever came next. For May's sake, they had to be. The tension in the car was palpable as Ada and William drove away from Beaumont Manor under the cover of darkness. The documents containing Gavin's incriminating actions were safely stored in a locked briefcase at William's feet. Every bump in the road, every shadow cast by the moonlight, felt like a potential threat. They both knew the risks. If Gavin realized they were gone before they reached the lawyer's office, he wouldn't hesitate to stop them. "I keep thinking he's going to appear out of nowhere," William muttered, his hands gripping the armrest tightly. "He won't," Ada said, though her voice carried a trace of doubt. "We've planned this. All we have to do is stick to the plan." But even as she said the words, her mind raced with worst-case scenarios. Gavin's resources, his cunning, his ability to manipulate those around him, they were formidable. If they didn't succeed tonight, there might not be another chance. The city lights finally came into view, a welcome reprieve from the oppressive darkness of the countryside. They navigated the quiet streets, the looming weight of their mission pressing down on them with every passing moment. William directed Ada to a modest brick building on a corner lot, its exterior unassuming but radiating a sense of permanence. The office of Arthur Morrow, the family lawyer, was their destination and their last hope. Inside, Arthur was waiting, his silver-rimmed glasses perched on the edge of his nose as he reviewed some papers. He looked up when they entered, his sharp eyes narrowing as he took in their anxious expressions. "William," Arthur said, rising to greet them, "you look like you've seen a ghost. What's going on?" "It's May," William began, his voice trembling slightly. "And Gavin. There's something you need to see." Ada stepped forward, placing the briefcase on the desk. "Mr. Morrow, this folder contains financial records, altered medical reports, and evidence of deliberate attempts to suppress May's recovery. Gavin has been orchestrating all of it." Arthur's expression grew grave as he opened the briefcase and began reviewing the documents. The room was silent except for the faint rustling of papers. Ada and William watched anxiously, every second feeling like an eternity. When Arthur finally looked up, his face was a mask of controlled anger. "This is damning," he said. "If half of what's in here is true, Gavin could be looking at charges ranging from fraud to medical negligence, and that's just the beginning." "We need to act quickly," Ada said. "Gavin's planning to move May to a private facility. If he succeeds, we might never see her again." Arthur nodded, already reaching for his phone. "I'll contact the authorities immediately. This has to be handled carefully. Gavin will fight back, and he won't fight fair." As Arthur made the call, Ada felt a flicker of hope. For the first time, it felt like they were gaining ground, that the truth was finally within reach. But she also knew the fight was far from over. Gavin wouldn't go down without a fight, and the next few hours would be critical. When Arthur hung up, his expression was resolute. "The police are on their way to the manor. They'll serve a warrant to search the premises and ensure May's safety. I'll go with them to oversee everything." "I'm coming too," Ada said immediately. "May needs someone she can trust." Arthur hesitated but nodded. "All right, let's move quickly." As they left the office, Ada glanced at William, who looked both relieved and terrified. "We're doing the right thing," she said softly. "For May." William nodded, his voice steady for the first time that night. "For May." The convoy of cars pulled up to Beaumont Manor just as the first hints of dawn streaked the sky. The once imposing estate now loomed like a fortress about to be breached. Police vehicles lined the driveway, their lights casting sharp flashes of red and blue across the shadowy grounds. Ada, seated in the back of Arthur's car, felt her heart pounding as she gazed at the house that had held so many secrets. "This is it," Arthur said as he stepped out, adjusting his jacket. His demeanor was calm, but authoritative. "Let's make sure everything is handled by the book." Ada and William followed closely behind as Arthur approached the lead officer, a stern woman named Detective Claire Reynolds. They exchanged a brief handshake before Claire turned to her team and issued orders. "Secure the perimeter. No one leaves or enters without my approval." The officers moved quickly, their boots crunching on the gravel as they fanned out. Ada stood beside William, her pulse racing as she watched the house, half expecting Gavin to appear at any moment. "He'll try to talk his way out of this," William murmured. "He always does." "Not this time," Ada replied, her voice steady. "We have the truth on our side." The front door of the manor opened and Gavin stepped out, his expression a mask of cool indifference. He was dressed impeccably, as if preparing for a business meeting rather than facing a police investigation. Behind him, Joyce hovered in the doorway, her face pale but composed. "To what do I owe the pleasure, Detective?" Gavin called out, his tone dripping with mock civility. "Mr. Beaumont, we have a warrant to search the premises and review all relevant documentation pertaining to May Beaumont's care," Claire said firmly, holding up the document. Gavin's jaw tightened imperceptibly, but he maintained his composure. "Surely there's been some misunderstanding. My wife's care is entirely above board." Arthur stepped forward, his expression unyielding. "We have substantial evidence to the contrary, Gavin. I suggest you cooperate fully." Gavin's gaze flicked to Arthur, then to Ada and William, standing resolutely beside him. For a moment his polished facade cracked, revealing a flash of fury. "You've made a grave mistake," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Not as grave as yours," William shot back, his voice steady. "This ends now, Gavin." The tension was electric as the officers moved past Gavin into the house, spreading out to begin their search. Gavin stood frozen for a moment, then turned to Joyce. "Don't just stand there," he snapped. "Do something." But Joyce didn't move. Her eyes met Ada's briefly, a flicker of something unreadable crossing her face before she stepped aside and allowed the officers to pass. Inside, the search unfolded quickly. Documents were seized, medications catalogued, and security footage reviewed. Ada stayed close to May's room, determined to be there when they examined her condition. When she entered the room with Detective Reynolds, May lay as still as ever, the faint beeping of monitors the only sound. "She's been showing signs of awareness," Ada explained, handing over her detailed notes. "These documents outline her progress over the past week. The medications she's been given were deliberately suppressing her recovery." Detective Reynolds reviewed the notes carefully, her expression growing graver with each passing moment. "We'll have our own medical team review this," she said, her tone serious. "But this is compelling." As the morning wore on, the pieces began to fall into place. The police uncovered financial records matching those Ada and William had provided, as well as altered medical logs that confirmed Ada's claims. It was undeniable. Gavin had orchestrated a campaign to keep May incapacitated for his own gain. When Gavin was finally placed under arrest, his mask of composure shattered. "This isn't over," he spat as the officers led him away. "You think you've won, but you haven't." Ada watched him go, her chest tight with a mix of relief and lingering fear. "He's wrong," she said quietly. "It is over." Later that day, as the house emptied of police and the dust began to settle, Ada returned to May's room. William stood by the bedside, his hand resting gently on his daughter's. May looked peaceful, her breathing steady, as if the storm of the past few weeks hadn't touched her at all. "She's free now," William said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "Thanks to you." Ada shook her head. "Thanks to May. She never gave up." May's fingers twitched faintly, as if in agreement. Ada smiled, a deep sense of satisfaction washing over her. The battle had been hard fought, but the truth had prevailed. Gavin's hold over the Beaumont family was broken, and May's path to recovery was finally clear. As Ada stepped outside into the fresh morning air, she felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The future was uncertain, but for the first time it felt like a future worth fighting for.